My father one time, a few years ago, he wrote me a letter and he said, in one way or another, he said, if it wasn't for living in an oppressed town, you wouldn't have had the incentive to really go out and prove something to anyone. But no, I'm sure I would have looked for punk rock, and it just would have been easier for me, and I would have gotten into it at an earlier age, I mean, I just think there's a breed of people who really honestly like music. Those are the people who usually become musicians. It doesn't really matter what environment you grow up in. It's just some environments are more restrictive than others. My parents were never music lovers. I don't recall my mom ever really owning any albums besides John Denver's greatest hits and just top 40 radio, Seasons in the Sun, really white bread pop music. Probably the first band that I was really into was the Beatles, and then all that top 40 radio.
That was from the interview Kurt did with MTV in December of '93. I'm going to share more in a few moments. Kurt had a very up and down relationship with his parents, Don and Wendy. By several accounts, he had a normal, happy childhood up until he was about 9, which was when his parents divorced in 1976. That legendary divorce is such a bore. That is one of the lines from Serve the Servants, the first song on In Utero, which was released on September 21st of '93. A little over 9 years later, in November of '02, Journals by Kurt Cobain was published. Journals is a collection of almost 300 pages of previously unreleased handwritings and drawings Kurt made. There's a segment in Journals where Kurt talks about Serve the Servants and his father. He mentions that he wrote Serve the Servants partly in order to voice his frustration towards his dad's lack of communication in his life. Cobain wrote the following: "I don't need a father-son relationship with a person who I don't want to spend a boring get-together with. In other words, I love you, I don't hate you, but I don't want to talk to you." I want to point out something here. Sometimes people with broken families are able to fix their relationships later in life. If Kurt hadn't died so young, who knows? Maybe him and his father would have gotten much closer, and maybe Kurt may have possibly taken back some of the things he said about his dad publicly. Kurt, after all, was well known for exaggerating things in interviews and public statements, so who knows? Maybe some of the stuff he said about his dad was also exaggerated. For his part, Kurt's father Don hasn't made many public statements about his famous son, so it's hard to know his side of the story. For instance, there's a few photos I've seen online of Don with his granddaughter, Kurt's only child, Frances Bean Cobain. This one was posted on Reddit around 2016-2017, and this one was posted around 2022-23. It's not clear exactly when the photos were actually taken, however, but in any case, it appears at least that Don and his granddaughter seem to have a friendly relationship. So again, who knows if Kurt himself may have had a better relationship with his dad later on. In any case, the breakup of Kurt's parents impacted him very deeply, both on an emotional level and physically. What I mean by physically is that Kurt bounced around many times over the years between living with his mother and living with his father. Kurt also dealt with various episodes of homelessness when both of his parents rejected him at different points in his teenage years. One of Nirvana's most famous songs ever, Something in the Way, is about the times Kurt claims he slept under a bridge when he was homeless. This is the bridge Kurt was referring to in his hometown of Aberdeen, Washington, about 2 hours from Seattle. By most accounts, however, Kurt never actually slept under the bridge, though he did spend a lot of time here when he was homeless. Now, a few minutes east of Aberdeen is another town called Montesano. Around 1977, when Kurt was about 10 years old, he first moved to Montesano with his father. Court records show that Kurt's mother Wendy granted his father Don full custody on June 28th of 79, though again, Kurt was already living with his dad before he got official custody. Overall, Kurt spent much of 1977 until 1982 living in Montesano with his father. One of the places they lived in was this trailer home. This is footage I took inside the house back in 2020 with Kurt's uncle Gary, who was still living there at the time. As of this posting in 2026, I believe Gary is still there as well. I'll show you the full video I did here with Gary in Kurt's childhood trailer home at the end of this video. Throughout this video, you're going to hear Kurt talking about his family and friends, various controversies, Nirvana's early struggles, his future plans for Nirvana, and much more. Here, Kurt discusses how his father's unused music collection in Montesano was very important.
when I was about 4th grade, I was living with my father in Montesano. What was it? He had a record club, and one of his friends, he was a bachelor. You know, he'd just recently gotten divorced, so one of his bachelor friends told him to get one of those subscriptions, and he didn't even open them up. He didn't even open up half the records that came, and they were just sitting there, you know, in the plastic still. And one day I opened them all up, and there was some great music, you know. Finally, I got to hear the harder stuff that they wouldn't have played in Aberdeen or on the radio in Montesano or Aberdeen. I was just like, you know, instantly a rock and roll fan, you know, a harder rock and roll fan.
Do you remember what you wanted to do before you got your first guitar?
I wanted to be a stunt person. I wanted to be Evel Knievel first. I remember one time I took a piece of metal and taped it to my chest and put a bunch of firecrackers. I taped a bunch of firecrackers on that piece of metal and put my shirt over it and lit myself on fire and jumped off the roof. But then I hurt myself too much. But at a really early age, I wanted to be a rock and roll star. I wanted to play drums. You know, ever since I got my first Beatles record, I wanted to play drums in a band.
In this next part, Kurt talks about the Beatles, his thoughts on being famous, and how much he loves drumming.
I wanted to have the adoration of John Lennon, but have the anonymity of Ringo Starr, you know? I didn't want to be the front man. I just wanted to be back there, but, you know, be a rock and roll star at the same time.
Well, eventually that happened, though. I mean, are you comfortable with that now? Or does that feeling still kind of hold true?
I'd still rather be a rhythm guitar player, yeah, or a drummer, but I just don't have a good rhythm. I'm terrible. I'm a really bad drummer, but I love to play drums. I was in a grade school band, and I played snare drum for years, and it went up until high school. I never learned how to read music, either. I always faked my way through it. I would watch the kid in first chair, you know, I would watch him figure out the piece, and then I would copy him. At an early age, for a long time, I really did want to be someone in the background, a rhythm guitar player or a drummer. You know, I didn't want all the limelight, because even if you're not a songwriter, you know, the lead singer always gets everything, you know, they get all the attention and everything, you know. So, and I still to this day would much prefer that, really.
In this next part, Kurt talks about his relationship with Chris Novoselic. Before Nirvana, Kurt had a band of sorts called Fecal Matter. It wasn't really much of a band, it was basically just him. But in 1985, Kurt and drummer Dale Crover recorded a Fecal Matter demo. Kurt talks about how that demo helped convince Chris to join him in a band.
Can you tell us about when you and Chris first met?
I knew him for at least 3 years before we started playing seriously in a band together. But we had, like, side bands with Buzz and the Melvins, other members of the Melvins and friends of ours.
So what was it that finally made you... I mean, I guess it was just that Chris didn't want to be in a band, right?
I don't think he ever really had very many aspirations to be in a band, really. He just liked playing guitar. I knew he had a guitar for years. But Dale Crover, the drummer for the Melvins, and I made a demo in, like, 85, late 85, at my aunt's house on a 4-track. And I had the tape for about a year or so, and I was always trying to push it on my friends, you know, to try to get them into starting a band with me. And one day Chris, after probably hearing it a few times, just decided, hey, this is pretty good, you know. So finally the hint worked, you know.
Was that just, I was asking Chris about this earlier, he wasn't sure. Did you play bass on that as well, or was it just guitar and drums and that was it?
I played a little bit of bass on it.
Yeah.
And Dale played bass on the other parts, some of the other songs.
That was Fecal Matter, right?
Yeah. That was my band, my imaginary band.
Here, Kurt reflects on what it was like playing with Chris for the first time, the early struggles of starting Nirvana, and Nirvana's first ever show.
Do you remember the first time you played together? Did it click right away, or...?
I think it clicked in a way where just the fact that we were actually playing music and I heard these songs with a full band for the first time, it was just so amazing. I mean, I'd heard these songs because they were recorded, but all the instruments were dubbed, you know, and to play them live in a room, it was amazing. I mean, I was like 6 years overdue of having a guitar and wanting to play with other people, but I could never get anything past, like, some guy that plays drums, and he'd bring his drum set over to my house, and I'd start playing this raunchy music, and they'd leave, you know.
What was the first thing you did together? Was it Hairspray Clean, or...
The first song that we wrote together? Yeah. I don't know.
I think you thought it was Hairspray Clean.
It could have been, yeah. But even at that time, when we first started writing songs, I would come up with the with the bass lines and everything. I would show everyone what to play because I was still writing songs, on my own time. But that was probably one of the first songs that I had written at that time, and we started to practice with as a band. I mean, he's added his own style to the band now since we've started writing songs together.
Do you have any memories of the first couple of gigs that you did?
Oh, sure. Let's see. The very first one. It was a party. If we played together in the house for a couple of hours, and if 2 people stopped by, we considered that a gig, a show to us. I mean, that was good enough. We had an audience of 2 people, But the first official show we actually played was at a party. It was way out in the woods. I can't even remember what town it was. It was somewhere in between Montesano and Aberdeen, and it was, a typical kegger type of thing, and it was pretty amazing. That was a fun night. We were really drunk, and we had some fake Halloween blood, and we smeared it all over ourselves and played our 7 songs off the tape. We alienated the entire crowd. The entire party moved into the kitchen and just left the band, just left us there in the front room playing our songs.
Was that Aaron?
Yeah, that was with Aaron Burkhart, yeah.
Nirvana's first ever concert took place on March 7th of 87 in Raymond, Washington, which is about 45 minutes south of Aberdeen. I also visited this location back in 2020. I'll be showing you that footage and going over the full history of that concert at the end of this video, alongside the Gary Cobain clip. Now, Nirvana's first ever single was Love Buzz. It was released in November of 88 by Sub Pop, Nirvana's first record label. Interestingly, Love Buzz was actually a cover. It was not an original Nirvana song. The Dutch band Shocking Blue released the original version of Love Buzz in 1969.
First single you did after you went to Sub Pop was a cover. Did you have any concern? Why did that end up being it instead of one of your songs?
I really don't know. I really don't have a very good answer for that other than it was a pop song. It was one of the only palatable songs that we had. At the time we were writing stuff like Hairspray Queen, and we had a lot of, even though there were a little bit of pop element in some of the songs, we thought that people would be able to swallow it easier. We'd get instant attention by that. It was such a catchy song, and it was so repetitive that we thought that, people would listen to it right away and remember it. Also, I think Bruce or John, I think it was John, suggested we record that song too. It was one of their favorite songs that we did.
Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Pondman are the 2 co-founders of Sub Pop. It was also their decision to only release 1,000 copies of the Love Buzz single for purchase, which is considered quite low.
Was it Sub Pop's idea to only do 1,000 of them, or was it?
Yeah, it was their idea. It was almost a surprise to us. They might have warned us. They might have told us that this is what they were going to do, but it was kind of a surprise at the time. We were just so thrilled to actually put out a single that it wasn't until after only 1,000 were printed that we started to complain about it. It was like, but there's more people who want to buy this thing. Why not sell more? It just didn't make any sense to us at the time. I understand it now, but still, if you're going to put something out, that's why we signed to a major label. There should be, everyone should listen to it if they want to,
Kurt's referring to how Nirvana signed with the major label DGC in 1990. As a major commercial label, DGC had much more resources to promote Nirvana than an independent label like Sub Pop. Sub Pop released Nirvana's first album, Bleach, in 1989. Interestingly, as you'll hear from Kurt thinks Nirvana should have released a different album before Bleach.
I've always felt that there should have been an album before Bleach, because by the time that we recorded the songs off of Bleach, we were really into that kind of music. We don't regret it now, but at the time we should have put out the Fecal Matter tape, or at least a lot of the songs that were on Fecal Matter tape. We should have re-recorded them, because that was just a period of our band. That was just part of our progression. We were really into experimental, noisy, like Butthole Surfers kind of music, that's always been the case with us. We always should have put out something a little bit before the last record,
So a lot of the stuff that ended up on Incesticide, you wish had come out before Bleach?
Yeah. most of the stuff on Incesticide should have come out before Bleach, actually.
So had you wanted to put some of the older songs on Bleach and ended up just doing the new stuff on your own, or was that sort of...
I think at the time...
Did you write new songs for Bleach?
Yeah, we did write new songs for Bleach. There were a lot of songs that were just written within the 2 weeks or even the last week prior to recording. At that time, we only had maybe 6 songs. I guess is what I'm trying to say is that we wrote so many songs in that week right before we recorded that we were excited about the new songs, so we wanted to record them. But initially, we wanted to just record the few new songs that we had and re-record most of the stuff that was on the Fecal Matter tape. And that would have been the album. You know, it would have been a lot more like Incesticide, but we just happened to write so many new songs, you know, that we just put it on Bleach. And they just happened to have been more in the 70s vein, you know.
What do you think happened when Dave joined the band? Did it seem like
this is it?
We can be around for a while like this and make 5 or 6 records.
Right. I mean, he just not only did he have perfect metronome timing, he hit really hard. He was able to go in between all the dynamics that we wanted to experiment with, and it was just perfect. And plus, he sang backup vocals, and I'd wanted that forever, ever since the beginning of the band. He's really good at copying other drummers' styles. I mean, he's got his own original style too, but he also can play a Led Zeppelin solo note for note, you know, perfectly. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Yeah, he's a great drummer.
The first album Nirvana did with Dave Grohl was Nevermind. It was produced by Butch Vig and mixed by Andy Wallace. Here, Kurt talks about what he thought about the sound of the album, becoming successful, and some of the burnout.
Nevermind was definitely an album we wanted to make. I mean, everything about that record is we have no regrets, other than maybe the production was too slick. I mean, now that I look back on it, I don't think it's as raw as it could have been, you know. And that's our fault. I can't blame it on anyone else. I can't blame it on Butch Vig, you know. I mean, he recorded the record perfectly. It's just, you know, that studios are a really, really deceiving environment, you know. They just, you don't know what it's going to really sound like until you take it home and it's on a tape and you listen to it over and over again, you know. And at that point, after we attempted to mix Nevermind for like 2 weeks, we were so burnt out on it that we just didn't even care anymore. By the time we got Andy Wallace in, it was just like, oh, yeah, this is fine. You know.
Why was he brought in then? Do you think you just thought about everything too much in the way it sounded, or?
Well, we recorded the album, then we immediately started mixing, and we were just burnt out, you know. We just couldn't get it together. I don't have any explanation for it, really. It just didn't sound good. We just couldn't get it right.
What was it like? I mean, I guess when I talked to you guys at Reading a couple of years ago, I think it was like 2 maybe 3 weeks before Nevermind came out. What was that like being out there with Sonic Youth? Was it pretty?
To be asked to go on tour by a band like Sonic Youth was like a dream come true. It was great. And the momentum and excitement at the time was so great because everyone sensed that the album was going to do pretty well. There was just a feeling in the air, you know, there was just like this new thing happening and no one could quite pinpoint it, but we knew that we were a part of it. One of the first shows we played with them was at the Reading Festival, and there had been alternative bands playing the Reading Festival for the last 3 or 4 years, you know. And we didn't know anything about it. We never knew that thing existed. And to walk out on stage in front of that many people and to realize that many people like this kind of music, it was just like, wow, where have we been? You know, we've been under a rock all these years, you know. But then again, you know, Europe is a bit different than America too. Sonic Youth has helped more bands than any band I can think of, you know. They always know what's hot and new, and you know, I mean, they just, you know, they're just really great. They're really good about things like that.
Did you feel a little bit better about going to DGC, knowing they had done it and Dinosaur had done it? And
oh yeah, we just basically do everything the Sonic Youth does. We just steal all their ideas, you know. That's what we're turning into now. I mean, if you saw the show tonight, if you saw that last thing we did, whatever you want to call it, you know, we're turning into a noise guitar prog rock band, you know. I mean, that's the next step for any band, you know. It's like, but they've been doing it for years before anyone else. I mean, honestly, I feel kind of burnt out with the formula that we've been doing, you know. We've been in this band for like 6 years, and playing pop music can get a bit redundant. So I think we all want to start experimenting, and really the only alternative you have is to turn into Sonic Youth, you know.
Nirvana was in Europe at the time Smells Like Teen Spirit blew up. Here, Kurt discusses how he didn't even realize how big Nirvana had gotten until the band returned to the US. He shares some more thoughts on how he feels about being famous.
It wasn't until we got back to the States, you know, I turned on MTV and there we were, you know, because they don't have MTV in Europe very much, in very many places. We really had no idea.
So you didn't get it gradually, just all of a sudden?
No, we just came home. It was like the Beatles, you know. It's like Nirvana mania, you know, stepping off the plane. There weren't a bunch of kids waiting with banners, but...
Were you surprised or shocked?
Shocked is a good word. How long did it take me to get used to it? Years.
Does it scare you or flatter you, or what's your reaction to the whole, when the record hit big and it was getting played all over radio, you were called the most important band of the 90s and the voice of the Generation X. You flattered by that or scared by that? Or?
I'm not flattered by it, no. I mean, I've said this a million times, but and I'm kind of tired of saying it, but I mean, we're a new wave band, and that's what happened with new wave, you know. Punk rock was the revolution, you know. It was the groundbreaking thing, and then all these punk rock bands, started making really tame, palatable music with punk rock fashion, and it entered the mainstream, became popular for a while, and it was a fad, you know. And that's the way I look at alternative music. You know, every once in a while I look at the Billboard charts and I just go, crap, just like I always have, you know. Except for R.E.M., and they totally deserve to be on Top 40, but I really can't think of any bands that are on Top 40 right now that I like, personally.
But, I mean, the punk bands that made a difference, or the new wave bands that did something, they didn't sell 9 million records worldwide.
No, they didn't. Because, yeah, I'm not saying we're a punk rock band, I'm saying we're a new wave band. But there were new wave bands that sold 9 million copies, you know, like the Knack and, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. Kaja, Goo Goo, whatever, you know.
Do you have any theory on why it happened then, or do you think it was just things were stale and it was kind of ripe for the picking?
You couldn't have said it better. It was just the right time. It was just the right album at the right time. I mean, I'm sure there was a collective consciousness, you know. People were just tired of Warrant, you know, just got old. Just like, you know, grunge music will be in a couple of years, you know, if it hasn't already. If we don't progress, if we don't change, if we don't take chances and do different things, if we put out Nevermind 3 next year, or in Utero 2, it's just going to get boring with people, you know. Pop music loses their audiences all the time. I mean, it doesn't happen very often, you know, for a pop star to become famous and stay famous for years, you know, Madonna and Michael Jackson, and that's about it.
And you have a good point that, I mean, things do come and go like that, but it's not unfair to say that something really big did happen.
Yeah, I mean, something did happen, but I think it's just a general attitude amongst people. I don't know if it really has that much to do with music. It's just, I think music has just been used as a tool. I think a good example is the shows that we've been playing on this tour, you know, and just like when we went to Reading for the first time, to realize that there are that many people, that many kids our age, that basically have the same views as we do and like the same kind of music. That's a really amazing thing. That's a really positive thing. And things just change all the time. 1990 was the year for change. It was just something, it was about time, you know, it was the beginning of a new decade.
If 5 years ago someone had said, all right, well, you're writing songs and you're in a band, you're playing guitar and singing, what do you want to do with this? What would have been your biggest hope?
To put out a record. I mean, the thought of putting out a record at that time, I mean, even just 5 years ago, to put out a record on an independent label was really, really hard for bands. It wasn't as common as it is now. Like, anybody can put out a record. Most people use their records, actual pieces of vinyl, as demos now, just to get a deal, you know. And that's one of the positive things about alternative music getting big, is that really obscure and noisy bands are being signed to major labels. And the positive thing about that is that they aren't being ripped off. You know, at least they're getting a good advance and they can live for a couple of years, you know, and they deserve to live comfortably, you know. All bands do, you know. If they're a good band and they put out good music, then they deserve to be paid, you know, the money that they deserve. It started happening like in the late 80s, you know. I mean, I remember going to punk rock shows and bands were always, I mean, bands from out of town were getting paid $30, you know. Some band from San Francisco comes up to Seattle and plays at the Gorilla Gardens. Here's your $30 and, you know, kiss my feet, the promoter would say, you know. And you know, maybe that band sold out the Gorilla Gardens and there were 400 people there. And they should have been paid what they deserve, you know, what they drew. But at the time, you know, in the late 80s, all of a sudden these independent bands, you know, just started demanding more money. We're not going to play. It was almost a revolution in a way, you know. It was really cool. I mean, I remember the first time we sold out the Vogue, and that holds like a couple hundred people here in Seattle. It's a bar, and we got paid $600. 3 years before that, we would have been lucky if we got $30.
Here, Kurt talks about Nirvana's plans for the future, his drug use, and more.
Now that you've put out 3 records and you've had all the success you've had, what would you hope happens now?
That we are able to sustain ourselves, to put out another really good record, and hopefully to progress. I really want to change our style of music. I don't want to turn into a prog rock band, literally, but I want to do something different, really different. You know, and I want to have enough guts to do that. And if it alienates people, that's too bad, you know. But, you know, the Beatles went from, not to compare us to the Beatles, but the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and bands like that went from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Sgt. Pepper's. That was a massive progression. And I just want to experiment. Every time that we play a show, I can look out in the audience and I can say, these kids really like our band. And I know they genuinely like us, you know, they like our music. That's just why I'm so happy about being in this band still. I wasn't happy a couple of years ago. I mean, obviously. But just being on tour every night, it's just been great. I'm so grateful that there are that many kids that still like us, that have overlooked all the rumors and all the stupid things that were printed about us in the last 2 years, you know. I hardly ever went out in public when I was on drugs, and I never made a spectacle out of it. I never promoted it. And now I'm going to be associated with heroin for the rest of my life, you know, and that's not my fault. I tried to keep it away from everybody because no matter how hard I don't want to be a role model or influence anyone, I still do. And I knew that I was taking drugs at the time, and there were rumors and people wanted me to talk about it, but I tried for months and months not to talk about it, you know. I tried as hard as I could to deny it, but after a while there was just no point in it anymore, you know. I was just thought of as a big liar all the time, and you know, it's not my fault.
Here, Kurt talks about the chronic stomach problem he had, which was bothering him for years.
It's gone.
Yeah?
Yeah. I finally have been prescribed the right stomach medicine after 6 years of being in constant pain. Finally, I haven't had a stomach problem for like over a year now. They never figured out what it was. I mean, most gastrointestinal doctors don't know anything about the stomach diseases. They just have a PhD. They get paid a lot of money for pretending and prescribing you different drugs, and it's a total scam as far as I'm concerned, because I've been going to doctors for 6 years, and I've tried every drug available except for this one last one that's brand new, and it finally worked. And it isn't a specific stomach ailment. It doesn't have a name or anything. It wasn't a matter of finding out what disease I had. It's you know, it's psychosomatic. It's part of my nervous system. And it's part of, you know, there are millions of people all over the world who have irritable bowel syndrome, and that's the common term that all doctors call a stomach problem. And they just say, "Oh, you have irritable bowel syndrome," but I can't fix it. I don't have anything to fix it. But, you know, there's just a variety of ulcer medicines that can slow down ulcers and eventually heal them. But I didn't have an ulcer. I just had a red irritation in my stomach. But I was in pain. I mean, I was in pain for so long that I didn't care if I was in a band. I didn't care if I was alive. And it just so happened that I came to that conclusion at a time when my band became really popular, you know. I mean, it'd been going on and building up for so many years that I was, you know, suicidal. I mean, I just didn't want to live. So I just thought, if I'm gonna die, if I'm gonna kill myself, I should take some drugs, you know. May as well become a junkie, because I felt like a junkie every day. You know, waking up starving, forcing myself to eat, you know, barfing it back up. Just imagine trying to eat your 3 meals a day and just concentrating and just crying at times, just like, I'm in pain all the time, you know. And being on tour was a lot worse too, you know, it made it even worse.
When did they medicine that Tourette?
About a year ago.
Here, Kurt shares some of his criticism regarding the Smells Like Teen Spirit music video. At one point, Kurt makes a reference to someone named Sam. Sam is the director of the music video, Samuel Bayer.
I mean, I like the video overall, but it wasn't what I pictured in my mind. When I come up with an idea for a video, I want it to be translated exactly how I see it in my mind, and it just wasn't that way. We didn't take enough time. We didn't prepare ourselves enough to have as much control as we wanted to. And I just remember walking in the day of the shoot and looking at the set, because I had meetings with Sam Bayer, and I told him what I wanted. I drew pictures of it, and I walked in and it wasn't what I wanted. You know, it looked like a Time Life commercial to me, you know, with that backdrop. It just looked like such a contemporary, you know those kind of commercials where people are sitting there, you know, trying to sell aspirin or something, or, you know, an AT&T commercial. That's what it looked like to me. It looked too contemporary. But still, the kids made the video, you know, and I had to, like, even after Sam had edited it, he edited it and sent it to me, and I didn't like it, and I flew down at the last minute to LA and edited it myself. I threw in a few extra things, which pretty much saved it, because I don't want to toot my own horn, but I mean, there was a lot of really good footage that wasn't used, and if a lot of that wasn't used, it would have been a really bad video.
More crowd stuff, you mean, and the kids going crazy?
Yeah. There wasn't really a lot of that, and most of the stuff that was used looked really contrived. There was no spontaneity in it, so I just threw all the spontaneous parts in.
Now, you're not going to make a video for All Apologies. You're just going to put the Unplugged.
I just haven't bothered to come up with any ideas lately. I've been on tour, and I haven't been thinking of anything other than just concentrating on touring. I just don't want to bother with it right now. I don't really see the need to put out more than 1 or 2 videos for each record anymore. It's basically a waste of money, because everyone knows we have a record out, you know. And if we're going to sell some more records based on the next video, then those aren't people who want to listen to our album anyhow. They bought it because of that video or that song. You know, I just want to sell albums to people who really like us and who already know about us and already like us, you know. So I don't see any reason for it. I actually don't want to do any more videos, but I've got a few ideas for Rate Me, and we want to release it as a single, so we might do something with that.
Do you want to talk about that at all, or do you want to save that for?
We'll save it.
Was All Apologies going to be the next single anyway? Because of the Unplugged stuff that I've seen, that's one of the ones that I think fits the Unplugged format the best. Was that the reason for it, or were you planning on putting it out as a single anyway?
No, it was going to be the next single. I don't think it was the best performance off the Unplugged thing. That's just my opinion. I don't think it was that good, really. We've played that song a lot better before. But I see what you mean. It does fit. It could work really well acoustically.
Yeah, I don't mean that particular performance necessarily. I just mean, I think if you listen to the 4 discs worth of stuff that you've got, that's one of the ones that seems like, if you hadn't seen you guys do it yet, listening to all of it would seem like that would be one of the biggest, most likely candidates.
Right.
Here, Kurt talks about some of the difference between In Utero and Nevermind, particularly the sound, the production of the 2 albums. You
weren't particularly crazy about the way a lot of the production ended up for Nevermind or something. Did that affect the way you went into In Utero at all?
I think it had a little bit to do with that, yeah. And we just wanted to make sure that it wasn't as commercial or slick sounding. And the main reason had nothing to do with wanting to alienate people or, it had nothing to do with that. We just wanted to make sure that we put out a record exactly how we want it. We wanted to put out a record that we would listen to at home. And we don't listen to very, very many bands that are produced the way Nevermind was produced. Although it is raw by comparison to most other commercial rock records, it's still, we don't listen to that kind of music. I mean, I really can't think of any other band besides R.A.M. that has that kind of production that I like, so.
Something actually that surprised me that I didn't know that Chris said earlier is that you actually originally were thinking about Steve Albini for Nevermind.
We've been thinking about Steve Albini forever. We've been wanting to have him produce us since around Bleach, actually.
The first thing that I thought of when I heard that he was producing it was just trying to think of the way you guys sound with Surfer Rosa.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I thought too. I just thought it was the perfect sound for us, because when I heard Surfer Rosa, I thought, that's exactly how I want my band to sound. That's how I've always wanted our band to sound, but we've never been able to capture that sound. It was just a coincidence that he produces records like that. That's what I've heard in my head for years. That kind of snare drum sound.
I think the big and maybe only criticism that he gets from the records he produces, and it's odd because the Big Black records and the Rape Man records, the vocals are right up there, and they're really, really loud, and they're one of the most prominent things in the records. But the criticism that he's gotten is that the vocals are always too low.
No, I agree. I think almost every album I've heard him produce always has the vocals too quiet. He's not much of a vocal man, I don't think. And we're a very vocal-oriented band, so it was kind of a struggle to get the vocals loud enough for him.
So there were discussions about that then?
Yeah, we're always asking him to turn the vocals up more.
In this next part, Kurt talks about producer-mixer Scott Litt, who was brought in to remix some of the songs on Utero.
We listened to In Utero for about 2 months after it was finished, after we finished it with Albini, and listening to the album over and over again, it got a bit redundant. That drum sound is a bit overbearing after a while, and so we didn't want the entire album to sound like that, We wanted something different, and Scott was available, and we loved the production of R.E.M. stuff, so we just thought, let's try Scott, and it turned out great. I mean, he's one of the greatest people I've ever worked with. I think we all want to do our next record with him.
Here, Kurt talks about a few of the songs on In Utero, particularly Rape Me, and how the lyrics were misunderstood.
I've read a few reviews, and it's just, people went completely overboard, My favorite inside source, So the song is about rape, right? But that one line doesn't mean that song is about me. It isn't about me being raped by the media or anything. Certainly isn't, But because that one line is in there, a lot of people have thought that that's what the song is about.
I mean, not necessarily about that particular subject, but it seems like you're looking back a little bit on Nevermind Mania.
Oh, on Scentless Apprentice, yeah. Just those few lines, though. Just the first few lines. But then the rest of the lyrics don't have anything to do with the band or my ideas about the band at all. Wait a minute, did I say Serve the Servants or Scentless Apprentice?
Oh.
I meant to say Serve the Servants. The first opening lines that say, teenage angst has paid off well, now I'm bored and old, that is certainly about my ideas about grunge rock and what I've experienced in the last few years. But the rest of the song isn't about that at all. It completely changes the subject.
At this point, Kurt discusses how Dave Grohl came up with the riff for Scentless Apprentice, and how things in general between him, Chris, and Dave are the best they've ever been.
He came up with the do that part and the drum part. He came up with the drum part first, and then he came up with the guitar part. But I came up with all the other guitar things over the top of it.
I hope that happens a little more in the future, or is it?
Yeah, sure. I'm all open for relieving myself of any kind of songwriting. That'd be great if Chris and Dave could write more songs. I don't know, since I haven't had a stomach problem and I've had a child and I'm married now, I'm sure I'm a lot easier to deal with, I'm not as grumpy as I used to be. I don't know, I just think our morale is at its best right now, you know? It's just, everyone just gets along. I mean, we've always gotten along. We've never really fought. I don't think we've ever gotten into a shouting argument with one another. We're pretty passive-aggressive, but now there are no bad thoughts about one another behind each other's backs at all, you know? It's like, I couldn't be happier right now.
Here, Kurt discusses the music videos for Come As You Are, In Bloom, and Lithium, all of which were directed by Kevin Kerslake.
You can just kind of explain how the idea for In Bloom came up and who that is, doing the Ed Sullivan bit.
That's Doug Llewellyn. The guy in the In Bloom video is Doug Llewellyn from the People's Court. It was my idea. I wanted something that looked like it was off of live television from the late 50s or early 60s. And I thought the best way to do it, instead of trying to reproduce that effect with new film, I asked Kevin, are those kinescope cameras still available? And he said, yeah, we can get them in Hollywood. You can get anything in Hollywood. So it just worked out perfectly. I didn't think we'd ever be able to actually find those kind of cameras, but we did. And that's another video that just came out exactly how I wanted it, just perfectly.
With the three perfectly nice, clean-cut young men.
I was talking to Kevin about it, and I said that I would like him to say something about how nice and clean cut we are, you know, how perfect we are, because, you know, the In Bloom video came out at the height of us being thought of as degenerates, you know, so, you know, we needed a lighthearted video, you know.
This next video Kurt describes is Come As You Are.
You know, I wanted a baby underwater, and I just wanted a water effect. Overall, I'd say, you know, a real large percentage of that was exactly how I thought of it in my mind. But he came up with the idea of the actual set, you know, with the stairs and the chandelier and stuff. And it just worked out perfectly. I mean, it's really good. It's great to work with somebody that can come up with their own ideas too and just surprise you. And not only come up with the same exact vision that you had, translate that, and then throw in their own ideas. And that works even better because then you have more things to work with, you know.
How long do you have to swing from the chandelier?
Quite a few hours. Yeah.
And Lithium was originally going to be a pretty elaborate, I guess, concept video.
Yeah, it's just that we failed to hire some puppet people. I guess that's what you'd call them, people who do animation and use puppets in time to be able to finish it, to get it out in time of the release date. So we just scrapped the idea. Actually, we just put it on hold. We're still working on it. We still want to do something with puppets. At the time, I wanted pretty much a rip-off of the Brothers Quay. You know, not a rip-off, but, you know, using the same imagery. Because I make dolls. I've been making dolls for years, and it just turns out that those are the dolls that I make are a lot like Brothers Quay dolls that they use. And when I first saw their short films, I was just amazed. It's like, this is the neatest thing I've ever seen. You know, that's my mind, you know.
Here, Kurt is asked to reflect on how having a second guitar player, Pat Smear, now changes his approach to playing guitar on stage.
Are you finding it easier to play guitar and sing at the same time now that you've got a second guitarist on stage?
Yeah, I do. Although I'm still concentrating on playing guitar a lot more than I thought I would. I thought it would relieve me so much that I wouldn't even have to try anymore, and I could screw up notes and it wouldn't matter, but I still hear myself screw up, so I still have to concentrate almost as much as I ever did before, you know, but it still is a relief. I mean, it also just rounds out the sound. I think that's the most important thing.
When I had heard about having the second guitar player, I had assumed you'd stick just with simple rhythm stuff so that you could sing easier, but you're still playing the leads.
Yeah, well, that's because I know the leads, and, well, actually I don't. A lot of times, I mean, even to this day, I still haven't bothered to learn the solo that I recorded on the album. You know, I just play whatever I want, but I just still like playing lead guitar sometimes, you know.
So is Pat going to be an official member of Nirvana now then, or is he just going to tour with you?
I don't know. We haven't tried to write any songs together yet. I'd like him to be, actually. I mean, he's so much fun to be around, and it's just been so great being on tour with him, you know. I'd like it to be a reality, but who knows.
The story of Nirvana from before they were famous is often overlooked, as is the case with almost every famous band. A lot of people tend to be more interested in the famous era of the bands they admire rather than from before they were big. While of course there's nothing wrong with having a favorite era of a band, I do think it's important not to overlook the period of time in which a band is developing and growing up. In my opinion, the best book out there in terms of the early history of Nirvana is Entertain Us: The Rise of Nirvana by Gillian G. Garr. I actually bumped into Gillian in Kurt Cobain's hometown Aberdeen while I was interviewing Aaron Burkhardt, Nirvana's original drummer. I'll be including the full interview with Aaron Burkhardt later in this video. But first, I want to read to you a part of Entertain Us where the early history of Nirvana's story is explored in great detail. If you're a fan of Nirvana and you're new to my channel, make sure to subscribe for more, lots more to come. All the videos here are original, done by myself. Quote, Kurt had long yearned to be in a rock band. It was a dream he'd had since he was a child, later telling his biographer Michael Azerrad that at age 7, he thought, quote, for sure I could be a rock star. I thought the US was about as big as my backyard, so it would be no problem to drive all over the place and play in a rock band and be on the cover of magazines and stuff. Aberdeen, Washington seemed an unlikely place for such dreams to come true. It had been founded in 1884, when logging was the predominant industry there, and in the adjacent towns of Hoquiam and Cosmopolis, all of which were nestled around a series of rivers that fed into Grays Harbor. Aberdeen's population peaked in 1930 at just below 22,000, but the Great Depression hit the area hard and the number of residents dropped steadily over the subsequent decades. Aberdeen still had a population of 19,000 when Cobain was born there on February 20th, 1967, but the timber industry was falling into decline, and the town's boom days were long since over. A half-hour's drive from the Pacific coast and 100 miles from the nearest large city, Seattle, also the largest city in Washington state, life in Aberdeen, a town just 3 miles long and 4 miles wide, was isolated. It's just a little bit behind the times, says Jeff Burlingame, who grew up in Aberdeen and was later a journalist for the local paper, The Daily World. It was a small-town life, pretty much. There were a few things you could do. You could be real athletic, you could be creative and shun, or you could be into music and shun. It was a slower-paced life, and there just wasn't as much culture. Kurt was one of those guys that was looking for culture, and it just wasn't there. Aberdeen was a place stuck in the past rather than looking forward to the future. As a child, Kurt nonetheless stood out amongst others his age due to his keen interest in art and music, something his parents, Don and Wendy, encouraged. By the age of 2, a children's harmonica and drum were among his favorite toys, and his Aunt Mary Earle, Wendy's sister, taped him on a Sony reel-to-reel deck as he sang Hey Jude, and the theme from the Monkees TV show at the same age. I was so in love with the Beatles, he told Everett True. I would dress up like John Lennon and pretend to play guitar and hold mini Beatles concerts for my family when they came over. At age 4, following a trip to the park, Mary watched as her young nephew went to the piano and banged out a rudimentary song about the trip. Kurt was also an avid visual artist. The book, Cobain Unseen, has a photo of him in front of an easel apparently about to copy a comic book cover, and when he was older, he shot short films on a Super 8 camera, some of them featuring clay figures he'd sculpted himself. But eventually, music began to occupy more of his time. He'd been given a Mickey Mouse drum set at a Christmas just before his 8th birthday, and played drums in the school band. Then, in 1981, he asked for and received a cheap second-hand guitar for his 14th birthday. By then, he'd moved on from the pop of the Beatles and the Monkees to the 70s hard rock acts, like Zeppelin, Aerosmith, and Kiss, although his rock tastes were still balanced by pop. He also became a fan of New Wave after seeing the B-52s on Saturday Night Live, and Devo would become another favorite. When he finally acquired a guitar, Kurt briefly took lessons from Warren Mason, who worked at Rosevar's Music Center in Aberdeen. Mason also upgraded his instrument, getting him an Ibanez. His main goal was to learn Stairway to Heaven, Mason later recalled. Among the other songs Kurt learned to play were AC/DC's Back in Black, Queen's Another One Bites the Dust, and The Cars' My Best Friend's Girl, which Nirvana would play at their last show on March 1st, 1994 in Munich, Germany. The lessons quickly fueled his own burgeoning musical creativity. Realizing that with power chords you can play just about anything, he soon began writing his own songs. I didn't think it was important to learn other songs, he said, because I just knew I wanted to start a band. Music also provided an escape from a troubled home life. Kurt's parents had divorced when he was 9 years old. For a time, he lived with his mother and sister in Aberdeen, then moved in with his father, who'd moved to the town of Montesano, 11 miles east. But as each parent took up with a new partner and Kurt reached his teens, he became withdrawn and argumentative, eventually leaving each household and being passed around among other relatives in the area. By the end of his high school years, he'd moved on to staying with friends or wherever else he could. His musical tastes were also beginning to veer towards punk rock. Kurt had become intrigued by punk after reading about the Sex Pistols' Shambolic 78 American tour. Later telling writer John Savage he'd, quote, fantasize about how amazing it would be to hear their music and be a part of it. As it happened, New York punkers the Ramones had actually played in Aberdeen on May 3, 1977, at the Rockers Tavern, a bar that hosted local acts and the touring bands that occasionally dropped in between dates in Seattle and Portland. Owning a live music and liquor venue in a town like Aberdeen is always an adventure, the club's owner Stan Foreman later noted. It appealed to a crowd that worked hard in the mills and timber industry and played hard on the weekends. The Ramones were an unusual choice for a venue more likely to feature mainstream touring acts like Foghat or the Guess Who. I heard the Ramones were coming, and I think there was me and one other guy in high school who even knew who they were, says Kurt Vanderhoof, then an aspiring guitarist. I couldn't believe the Ramones were playing. I went down there and I couldn't get in. I was 16. I couldn't get into the bar. But I wanted to hear it, so I just hung outside. A couple of people I knew, older brothers of some of my friends, they did get in. And they were all like, those guys suck. They were stupid. It was a prevalent attitude in the region, and aside from that one occasion, no other punk groups made it to Aberdeen. So, Kurt Cobain was left to play what he imagined punk might sound like. Telling biographer Michael Azerrad his early songwriting efforts were, quote, 3 chords and a lot of screaming. Like Led Zeppelin, but it was raunchy and I was trying to make it as aggressive and mean as I could. It was a deprivation that actually worked to Kurt's advantage, forcing him to develop his own creativity instead of simply absorbing outside influences. By the end of 1982, Kurt had made enough progress with his songwriting that he wanted to take the next step and make a recording. During Christmas break that year, he made his first known home demos at his Aunt Mary's Seattle house. Mary had begun playing guitar at age 11. And made her first public appearances at local venues where her brother Chuck's band, the Beachcombers, were playing. She later formed a 4-piece band that would play in Elks and Moose lodges as well as hotel lounges in the region. She married and moved to the Seattle area in 1979, and for a time continued performing as a solo artist. A shared interest in music naturally drew Kurt and Mary together, and when Kurt got his first guitar, he phoned his aunt to ask if guitar strings were put on alphabetically. When he arrived to make his demo, he was just as solicitous about learning to use her equipment. He was always very, very careful, she says, and whenever he ran into any problems with the equipment, he would always ask me, Aunt Mary, could you help me with this? Kurt used Mary's 4-track TIAC reel-to-reel deck. He also played a guitar and a funky little Sears bass that his aunt owned, and which later sold at an auction for $43,750. But when Mary offered him the use of her Roland Compu rhythm drum machine, Kurt firmly turned her down. Oh, no way, he said. I want to keep my music pure. Instead, he used his pink Samsonite overnight suitcase as a makeshift drum, borrowing wooden spoons from Mary's kitchen for drumsticks. In search of more unusual sounds for the recording, he also made use of a duck call that Mary had. He just had to put some weird things in there, she recalled. Although Kurt recorded his music in the room alone, Mary and her husband could hear the ringing throughout the house. Most of what I remember about the songs was a lot of distortion on guitar, really heavy bass, and the chunky sound of the wooden spoons, she says. And his voice sounding like he was mumbling under a big fluffy comforter with some passionate screams once in a while. Kurt named the tape Organized Confusion, a phrase he also wrote on a t-shirt, but while he presumably made copies of the recording for his friends, none have surfaced to date. A month after the session, Kurt sent his aunt a letter apologizing for making so much noise at her home. I can't handle the thought of invading your brain cells with my chainsaw music, he wrote. I can't see how you could stand it the last time I was up there. In the summer of 1983, Kurt made the surprising discovery that there was a real-life punk rock band in Montesano. The band was the Melvins, who had only been active for a few months, founded by Roger Buzz Osborne. Buzz, who'd moved to Montesano at age 12 from the even smaller town of Morton, Washington, was initially a fan of hard rock acts like Kiss, Aerosmith, and AC/DC. But had become interested in punk after some friends raved to him about a Clash show they'd seen in Seattle. Photos of acts like David Bowie and the Sex Pistols in Cream magazine further pivoted his interest. Unlike the many music fans who saw a clear divide between punk and hard rock and metal, Buzz was quick to pick up on the similarities between the genres. The Sex Pistols album, Nevermind the Bollocks, just sounded like a logical extension of what I'd already been listening to, he explained. Whether it was Ted Nugent or whatever, the vocals were different, but I didn't think the music sounded a whole lot different. And then, I gradually got into more and more punk rock type stuff solely on my own. Buzz had started playing guitar toward the end of his high school years, teaching himself by listening to a few punk records he owned. He wouldn't own an electric guitar until after he graduated. He introduced a fellow student, Mike Dillard, to punk by playing him Nevermind the Bollocks, I was going, oh my goodness, this is the greatest thing I ever heard, Mike recalled. Mike then brought in his cousin who owned a bass and another classmate, Matt Lukin, as a second guitarist. But as Mike's cousin rarely showed up for jam sessions, Matt soon moved over to bass. The budding group began by playing covers of classic rock acts like The Who, Jimi Hendrix, and Cream, but quickly realized that if they wanted to have any kind of credibility, they'd have to write songs of their own. There was no future unless you were writing your own music, Buzz said. They also needed a name, and decided on the Melvins, the first name of the manager of the Montesano Thriftway where Buzz and Mike both worked. It was both an inside joke, neither Buzz or Mike liked their boss, and deliberately enigmatic, offering no clue as to what the band's music might sound like. We wanted a name that was like the Ramones, Buzz explained. Kurt had been given a flyer by Buzz when he was at a Thriftway one Friday that read, The Them Festival, tomorrow night in the parking lot behind Thriftway, free live rock music. Curious, he returned on Saturday to find the band set up in a park and ride, behind the store. We found this outdoor plug from a building next to the parking lot, said Mike. We just dragged a big extension cord over there and plugged all the amps and stuff in and set up about 7 o'clock. At the time, the Melvins played at a breakneck pace typical of punk and hardcore. Their songs were rarely longer than 2 minutes, with each musician playing his instrument in an all-out attack, topped by Buzz's abrasive vocals. Although the group's first official release came out in '84, the 2005 CD, Mangled Demos from '83, has recordings made during this period. Kurt was enthralled by the band. They played music faster than I ever imagined music could be played, and with more energy than my Iron Maiden records could provide, he wrote. This was what I was looking for. He later told journalist Gina Arnold, when I saw them play, it just blew me away. I was instantly a punk rocker. He immediately became one of the band's followers, a small group of like-minded friends who hung out at Melvin's rehearsals in Montesano, and were mockingly called Klingons by Buzz. The Klingon nickname was first mentioned in Come As You Are, but future Melvin's drummer Dale Crover later insisted, in journalist Mark Yarm's book Everybody Loves Our Town, whoever says we called the people who hung out with us the Klingons is completely full of it, because I never heard anybody described as Klingons. Kurt was already familiar with some of the band's members. He'd been on the same baseball team with Matt, and had Buzz in his art class. He was always a good artist, drawing-wise, Buzz said of Kurt. He would draw really amazing caricatures of the teacher having horrible things done to them. Kurt's entrance into the Melvin circle proved to be an invaluable step in the development of his own career. He'd finally discovered a group of friends who were as serious about music as he was. The band set a further example in their determination to do something musically different, stepping outside of the cover band status of most local acts. And 4 out of Nirvana's eventual 6 drummers would have direct ties to the Melvins. Nirvana changed the shape of music all over the world, Buzz later told Jeff Burlingame. And if it wasn't for the Melvins, they never would have even existed. Remember, no Melvins, no Nirvana. Buzz's collection of punk records was also useful in introducing Kurt to music otherwise unobtainable in Aberdeen. Buzz had expanded his own knowledge of punk acts when he'd met Kurt Vanderhoof in the fall of '83, when both briefly attended Grays Harbor Community College. Kurt Vanderhoof had returned to Aberdeen after a stint in The Lude, a Seattle-based punk band who'd relocated to San Francisco. Kurt Vanderhoof was happy to share his punk record collection with Buzz, and even sang with the band at an early Melvin show. I was apparently the only guy that knew all those songs they were doing, he says. They were doing Ramones and Sex Pistols and all that kind of stuff. Buzz described Vanderhoof's record collection as a really good education. I never would have found those records. None of that stuff was ever down there. Buzz also tracked down punk records via mail order, patiently waiting weeks and weeks and weeks for them to arrive. Another source was Tim Hayes, a friend who worked at a DJ Sound City at Aberdeen's Wishka Mall, who later became the owner of Seattle indie record store Fallout Records. Tim Hayes' boss would let him take promos of non-mainstream acts the store wasn't interested in selling, the Stranglers, the Cramps, the Dead Boys, etc. Buzz Osborne, in turn, made compilation tapes of those records which he then passed out to his friends, introducing the small but passionate Grays Harbor punk community to numerous other groups they would otherwise not have heard. Kurt Cobain, for one, found himself drawn to, quote, the psychotic, weird, dirgy bands like Butthole Surfers. Also among the band's fans was a 6'17" named Chris Novoselic. Chris Anthony Novoselic was born on May 16, 1965, to Chris and Maria Novoselic. Both of his parents were originally from Croatia, and immigrated to San Pedro, California, where they met and married in 1964. Chris was born in the nearby town of Compton, and raised in Gardena, where the family grew to include another son, Robert, and a daughter, Diana. Chris had been obsessed with music since his childhood, listening to AM radio while watching his father work on the family Volkswagen. My dad used to listen to Chuck Berry and the Rolling Stones and stuff, he says. He listened to Dick Dale. My dad was always cranking 4-track tapes. He had this garage, it was kind of his clubhouse. And he would paint, work on cars, just kind of dink around, like what I like to do, and listen to music. So I listened to a lot of music. The Beatles were another big favorite. He was just as keen to find music shows on television, watching programs such as American Bandstand, Soul Train, and Midnight Special. By the 70s, he too had moved on to hard rock metal acts like Aerosmith, Zeppelin, and Kiss. When I was really young, like 10 years old, I had all their posters and stuff, he later admitted about Kiss. In 1979, the Novoseliches moved to Aberdeen, where Chris felt decidedly out of place. I was now in a different social scene where the kids dressed different, Chris later explained. There weren't a lot of kids in school that I could relate to with music. Maybe I just had a little more sophisticated understanding of music. But I wasn't very happy and my parents noticed that. And they go, oh, let's send Chris to Croatia and see if that will work for him. Chris spent a year in his parents' homeland, encountering a very different educational system than what he'd been used to at home. School was very demanding, he recalled. You'd have to study a lot. It seemed like the standards were a lot higher in their public education. Along with studying more orthodox subjects like history and math, there were classes like civil defense that touched on the harsh realities outside the schoolroom walls. There were a couple of times when this teacher brought in this huge gun to class and showed us how to disassemble it and put it back together. With his shortwave radio, Chris was able to gain exposure to the punk and new wave music beamed to the continent by the BBC. When he returned to Aberdeen in 1980, he began making music himself. As a child, he'd taken accordion lessons, and now his mother bought him a guitar. It just seemed like I listened to so much rock and roll. I just thought I'd take it up. So, I started playing guitar. Chris still felt out of place with his classmates, but kept busy in other ways, taking vocational classes in addition to his high school coursework, as well as after-school jobs. He'd also been conscientiously taping each week's broadcast of Your Mother Won't Like It, the punk new wave show that aired on Seattle station KZOK. He finally found people who shared his musical interests, when a coworker at Aberdeen's Taco Bell introduced him to Buzz and Matt, bringing Chris into the Melvins circle. Buzz was also impressed with Chris' taste in music. I played Chris some music, and he was one of the few people who actually got it, he said. Chris had also found others in Aberdeen more resistant to new music. One friend he tried to interest in punk brushed him off. With few places available to play locally, the Melvins started landing gigs out of town, first in Olympia, the state capital, an hour's drive east of Aberdeen. But when Mike began spending more time with his girlfriend than the band, Buzz decided he needed to be replaced, although he avoided firing him by asking Matt to tell Mike the band was breaking up. He then asked Chris if he knew any drummers, and Chris introduced him to Dale Crover, who had also jammed with Chris' brother Robert. Buzz had previously seen Dale playing in local cover bands. That's really all there was, Dale explained. If you wanted to be in a band, you played with people that wanted to do high school dances. To do those shows, it was covers of the day. Dale was excited to be asked to join the Melvins, because he knew the band played the occasional show out of town. For his part, Buzz was excited about Dale's powerful drumming. He was more into heavy metal, he said, and then we introduced him to the punk rock thing, and 1,000 things really changed for us. We got a top-notch, #1 great amazing drummer, and that just pushed us through to what we ended up doing, which was music that's far more complicated, way more musical. A guitar player friend of Dale's, Larry Kalenbeck, would also have a huge impact on the Melvin sound, teaching Buzz the drop D tuning used with the lower E string tuned down a whole step to give the music a darker, heavier sound. Once Dale joined the band, Melvin's rehearsals moved to his parents' house in Aberdeen. Dale's older siblings had moved out, so there was plenty of room. His parents were finished with raising kids and he got away with murder, said Buzz. He was able to do whatever he wanted. The neighbors there, as long as we got done by 7 p.m., they didn't care. We practiced all the time. Kurt and Chris were regular attendees at the band's rehearsals. They were open-minded weirdos, said Buzz, as far as you can be in that environment. When there's not a lot of people that are thinking along the lines that you are, then you tend to gravitate towards the ones that are. We had a really dark sense of humor about everything. We would do all kinds of stupid things. One of our favorite things to do was to take out want ads from newspapers that were 6 or 7 months old, and then call the people, "Are you guys still selling that car?" We thought stupid stuff like that was hilarious. Chris was another happy recipient of Buzz's compilation tapes. He was particularly impressed with the first album by San Francisco band Flipper, album aka Generic Flipper, although he admitted it took a few spins before he fully appreciated the band's raw sound. "The third time I heard it, it just blew me away," he said. but at the same time, generic Flipper is nowhere on the radar screen. Society doesn't recognize how important this is. Well, I recognized it, and Kurt sure did. He loved that record. In late 2006, Chris Novoselic would join Flipper for a 2-year stint. Now, one of the few opportunities for local bands in Aberdeen to play a more professional venue than a house party came on May 4th, 1984, when the Melvins opened at a concert at Aberdeen's DNR Theatre. That show went really, really well, surprisingly, Kurt Vanderhoof recalls. Chris Novoselic joined the Melvins during their set for a cover of Cream's Sunshine of Your Love. It was probably his first public appearance. Seeing other shows required travel, usually up to Seattle. Matt had this big Impala, Chris recalls. It sat 6 comfortably. Big bench in the front, bench in the back. We just cruised up there. Now, they didn't just see punk shows. Buzz Osborne recalls seeing Van Halen, as well as punk bands. I didn't see a lot of difference. I thought they were both equally good, he said. But I appreciated the punk rock stuff more, because it was more intimate. And ultimately, that's what drove me away from arena rock eventually. Punk rock spoke to me more, and the intimacy and the message and things of that nature. And then I realized this was really a big eye-opener, that the world is bigger than the world that I'd been in, and that there's a lot more cool things going on that the people that I was around had no idea about. At the time, no clubs in Seattle regularly hosted punk shows, so concerts were held in a variety of unlikely venues, including the hall of one building originally built to cater to Seattle's Norwegian community. Music offered the one bright spot in Kurt's life. Beyond that, his future prospects seemed increasingly dim. He dropped out of high school in the spring of '85 and soon found himself working as a janitor at the very school he dropped out of. Most of his janitorial jobs were short-term, as were his living arrangements. He was evicted from one apartment and asked to leave 2 other friends' homes when he overstayed his welcome. The only area in which he showed any sense of discipline was music. He jammed with the Melvins when he could, although there are conflicting stories as to whether or not he was ever seriously considered as a potential 4th member. But he was a regular at all their shows, sometimes even helping to carry their gear in order to get in for free, and drawing a Kiss mural on the side of the band's van. He also played with anyone who was willing, although he had so far been unable to get a band together that moved beyond the practice room. We had several joke bands, as we called them then, but our main focus was on the Melvins, who were starting to get an Olympia, Seattle-based following, says Greg Hokinson, another friend who hung out at Melvin's practices. The short-lived band that Kurt put together with Hokinson and Dale Crover certainly had a joke name, Fecal Matter, and only managed to play one show. The group made a few primitive recordings on a boombox with some overdubbing, recording a backtrack, and then playing it on a stereo while Kurt sang into the boombox. Hokinson recalls the band working through a number of covers, the Ramones song Carbona Not Glue, the blues number Nobody's Fault But Mine, which Zeppelin had recorded on Presence, songs by Jimi Hendrix and the Monkees, and an Elvis song, quote-unquote. Kurt also worked on original material. Although Kurt didn't make the cut as a Melvin, Buzz was nonetheless impressed with his efforts to do something different. I remember him showing me things and I thought, wow, he said. There's a certain magic to putting 2 simple chords together in a way that sounds nice to someone. Kurt had the ability to do that. Now, was he the greatest singer? No. Was he the greatest guitar player? No. But he had something that people who are better singers and better guitar players don't have. The ability to put something together in an interesting way. That kind of technical ability of being able to master full guitar playing and be an amazing singer has nothing to do with writing music, Nothing. In the spring of 1986, Kurt decided to more formally document Fecal Matter's work, and Matt drove him and Dale back to Aunt Mary's house to record another demo. Since I wasn't as good a drummer as Dale, I didn't do any recordings with them, Hokinson explains. This recording session was previously thought to have happened in December of '85, but Mary remembers it taking place around Easter. They set up in my music room and they just crank it up, she recalls. It was loud. They would put down the music first, and then he'd put the headphones on and all you could hear was Kurt's voice screaming through the house. It was pretty wild. My husband and I, we just look at each other and smile and go, you think we should close the window so the neighbors don't hear? So they don't think we're beating him up or something? Mary also noticed how Kurt had improved as a musician since his last visit. He was much more confident in his vocals, she observed, and he was more progressed in knowing what he wanted the thing to sound like. Kurt and Dale recorded a total of 13 of Kurt's songs, with Kurt on guitar and vocals, Dale on bass and drums. They survive as the earliest known examples of Kurt's songwriting. The music clearly reveals his influences, fast, thrashing punk, and the slower chug of hard rock. Vocally, he's still searching for a style, Having not yet found that familiar rasping drawl, he growls and shouts. He sings in a clipped British accent. He speaks in a mumbling drone. As Kurt later recalled, it was totally abrasive, fast punk music. There were some Nirvana elements, some slower songs even then, and some heavy influence stuff. Lyrically, the songs took broad, sarcastic swipes at mainstream society. Aunt Mary recalls, as far as really sharing his music with me and asking what I thought, he really didn't do that, she says. Kurt was very sensitive about the stuff that he wrote, and he was very careful about who he let hear it. He didn't really like someone just poking fun at it, and being a songwriter myself, I can understand that. One song in particular stands out, Spank Through. Of all the Fecal Matter songs, it veers the closest towards pop, with an atypically jangling guitar opening. Kurt's voice drones during the verses, going up an octave in the chorus, which he sings with a mock sincerity. The song is the only one from the Fecal Matter session to be officially released thus far, on the 2005 compilation Sliver, The Best of the Box. Although a number of the other songs have surfaced on collector's circuits in the either partial or complete form. Spank Through and Downer would later be re-recorded, and Aneurysm would also be performed live for a brief period, while lyrics from other numbers would resurface in the Nirvana songs If You Must and even in his youth. Kurt named the Fecal Matter tape Illiteracy Will Prevail, and immediately dubbed off copies for his friends with a handmade illustration on the J card of a pile of excrement. He spelled his name correctly on the inside of the J card, but on the outside credited himself as Kurt, Kurdt equals guitar mouth. It was the first time he was known to have spelled his name in this fashion, and he was credited as Kurt with a D on all future releases until the Smells Like Teen Spirit single, as well as in interviews and press releases. I have no real reason, he later told Michael Azerrad about the various name spellings he used over the years. I just didn't bother spelling it correctly. I didn't care. Of course, there was already another Aberdonian who spelled his name the same way, Kurt Vanderhoof. In any case, Dale Crover was later dismissive of the recording, telling writer Greg Prado in Grunge is Dead, "People talk about that demo like it's this unreleased thing that must be amazing, but not really. A crappy 4-track demo." At the time, Buzz Osborne thought otherwise, as he wrote in a letter to Chris and his girlfriend Shelley Dilley, who had moved to Arizona in early '86. The letter says the following, quote, "Cobain and Dale went up to his aunt's house and made a tape of some of Kurt's songs. I was pretty impressed. Some of his songs are real killer, despite the poor sound quality. It seems good, but could have been better with a little more time. Nevertheless, it's still a great demo. I think he could have some kind of future in music if he keeps at it." The letter was dated April 16, 1986, more proof that the session happened in '86, not '85. Had the session had happened in '85, Kurt would have undoubtedly given Chris the tape then. And the letter makes it clear that Buzz is talking about a recent event, not something from 4 months ago when Chris was still living in Aberdeen. Kurt's aunt says the session happened around Easter, which in '86 was on March 30th, 2.5 weeks before Buzz wrote his letter. Kurt continued practicing the Fecal Matter songs with Buzz and Mike Dillard, but the project quickly fell apart. Instead, Kurt ended up making his public debut in a one-off trio called Brown Towel, a name misspelled Brown Cow on some posters, on May 3rd, '86, at GESCO, the Greater Evergreen Student Community Cooperative Organization, a venue affiliated with the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. Kurt recited his lyrics and poetry as Buzz and Dale backed him. Although he later confessed that his nervousness made him get, quote, totally wasted on wine before the performance, he acquitted himself well, just jumping around the stage, reading, singing, and screaming, as Dale later put it. A fair description of Kurt's performing style in Nirvana as well. "I had a splendid time," Kurt later told the fanzine Matt Lucan's Legs about the gig. The show also helped distinguish Kurt from the other Melvins followers. Although Kurt's attempts to take his music further were still halted by his inability to find any compatible musical collaborators, he was now nonetheless focused on pursuing a musical career, having gone so far as to ask his Aunt Mary for advice on how to put together a demo tape, and dealing with song publishers. She sent him a copy of Making It With Music, Kenny Rogers' Guide to the Music Business. That says to me, and should say to others, that he was definitely looking to get into the music business, and that was the direction he was heading, Aunt Mary later recalled. So many people think that Kurt was like, "Oh no, I don't care if I'm ever famous." I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that for a moment. I think in every musician, there's a part of us that wants to be up on that big stage and wants to be on MTV. And he definitely had stuff inside of him that he felt was worthy of getting out there and making it. He thought he could do it. And so I sent him that book. Kurt would finally find the musical partner he'd been looking for in Chris Novoselic. Chris Novoselic returned to Aberdeen in the latter half of 1986, having spent only a few months in Phoenix. Kurt and Chris had previously jammed together as teenagers and were both in a Melbourne side project called the Stiff Woodies, a name inspired by the name of a Seattle punk band, Limp Richards. That band was just like a revolving door. Just messing around, says Chris. Just having fun and drinking alcohol and jumping around and screaming, making noise. Kurt played both guitar and drums in the group, and Chris occasionally took a turn as a singer. A surviving recording of a session at Chaos, Evergreen's radio station, has him handling the lead vocals on the up-tempo breakdance boogie, enthusiastically urging the listener to, quote, party down, party up. At the time, Chris' musical ambitions were less serious than Kurt's. I was having fun, having kicks, he says. I always wanted to be in a band, but there was nobody I could be in a band with. Now that he'd returned to Aberdeen, Kurt gave Chris a copy of the Fecal Matter tape. I was dinking around the house listening to it, and I said, hey, this is really good, he recalls. I really liked it. I thought it was cool. It was good melodies and interesting. He was especially impressed with Spank Through. It's a well put together song, Chris said. It's got a hook. It's kind of unique. It sounds different. And I went, yeah, let's do it. We kind of found each other, Chris says of his musical alliance with Kurt. Just out of necessity. Just to play music together. Of all the people that were hanging out with the Melvins, there was just something. We were drawn to each other. It made sense. The hard times were far from over, but the band that would become Nirvana was on its way. In September of 1986, Kurt Cobain moved into a small house at 1000 East 2nd Street in Aberdeen, universally referred to as the Shack due to its dilapidated condition. It quickly became as much of a hangout for their friends as Dale Crover's home had been, with the added benefit of having no parental figures around. Chris was already Kurt's most frequent jamming partner, but it took them a while to find another member for their nascent group. They rehearsed with one friend, Bob McFadden, upstairs at Maria's Hair Design, the beauty parlor owned by Chris' mother. Other musicians came and went, as the two constantly rejigged the lineup, including who played which instrument. Sometimes, Kurt and Chris switched from their usual guitar and bass roles to drums and guitar respectively. Kurt was really good on drums, Chris recalls. They also toyed with the idea of putting together a Creedence Clearwater Revival covers band. But, like many of their ideas, it came to nothing. That was a ploy to make money, Chris explains. Play in a tavern like a bar band, but we thought we'd play cool songs. It was just something to do to screw around on the side. We played once or twice and got bored with it. Eventually, they finally approached Aaron Burkhard, a drummer they'd met at Melvin's practices. According to Matt Lukin, he and Buzz Osborne had briefly considered Aaron as Mike Dillard's replacement in the Melvins, but decided against it in part because of Aaron's mustache, the bane of punk rockers. Having a big bushy Tom Selleck mustache just meant you were trying to be something you weren't, Matt explained. Aaron, older than both Kurt and Chris, had grown up in West Seattle and moved to Aberdeen in his mid-teens, where he played in a local band called Soon. Aaron lived behind Dale Crover's house across an alley dubbed Swagger Alley. I used to go over and watch the Melvins practice a lot, he says. Every time they practiced, I was over there. It was just something to do. I was amazed at how loud they were. Aaron was also hanging out at Kurt's shack. We used to party in there, he says. We used to drink Schmidt beer and smoke pot all day and play music. Kurt didn't have a refrigerator or a stove. All he had was a little toaster oven, and in his room he had a framed picture of Bob Sherman on his wall. I never really understood that, so that was pretty weird. Despite being a staunch metalhead, in Aaron's words, I was into Motley Crue and AC/DC and Kurt was more into the punk scene, Aaron agreed to join the fledgling band. I'd heard that Kurt was a guitar player and that Chris was a bass player, he says. I never heard him play before. The day I joined the band, I didn't have no drums, so we went out to a friend's house and he set me up with some drums, and we went over to Kurt's house and practiced that same night. It was an early indication of Kurt's single-minded focus on rehearsal. Kurt was just a stickler for practicing, Aaron says. We practiced a lot, every day for hours. Once Kurt got off work, it was practice non-stop. It was pretty crazy. Sometimes we'd play the same song over and over until Kurt got it right, you know. We would play the set and then I would just start playing the songs again right away without ever looking up to see if those guys wanted to play them again. Kurt later told biographer Michael Azerrad, I just whipped them into shape. Although the band would warm up with Led Zeppelin covers, from the outset they concentrated on original material. The songs were all Kurt's, although he tried to downplay his dominant role, telling one journalist, I don't like to be considered the songwriter, but I do come up with the basics. It was a great songwriting pattern that would continue throughout Nirvana's career, with the germ of a song idea generally coming from Kurt. He was the lead songwriter, Chris confirms. He had the idea, like he had riffs and a vocal line that he'd be hammering out. He'd be holed up somewhere by himself, hammer things out, and then he would just start busting them out at rehearsal. Sometimes it was just a riff and a vocal melody. Sometimes it was a couple of riffs, more like a song. Then it depended on what everybody else's input was. The drummer is really important. The drums kind of set a tone, a beat, that tells you what kind of personality the song is going to have. And I put my spin on it too. I get a hit off the song and try to do something interesting. Instead of just following the guitar, I'd just go for things, or come up with another part, like a bridge or something. He'd just have the one riff and melody and I'd just bust something out. And then we'd all jump on board to that. And then the next thing you know, there'd be another part of the song. A lot of it was unsaid too. The band just cranked it out. But it definitely had a leader. Kurt knew what he wanted to do. 3 songs from the Fecal Matter demo tape were rehearsed: Spank Through, Downer, and Aneurysm. Chris dismisses the later number as grotesque punk rock. It was the melodic pull of songs like Spank Through that were of greater interest for him. And for all of Kurt's later disparagement of Downer, Chris felt it showed the band's versatility. It's kind of an alt-punk song, he says. It shows the band right from the start wasn't a hardcore band or wasn't a rock band. The genre was kind of alt-punk. We tried to be original, to have a song that's unique and has its own personality. I know Kurt was listening to a lot of Scratch Acid and Butthole Surfers, just songs with personality. Kurt was also busy writing new material, drawing on the hours he spent sitting around in my underwear just picking out riffs, pieces of songs, in his own words. Kurt did so much work while the rest of us were off having our lives, says Ryan Agner, who knew Kurt and Chris from school, and, living a block away from Kurt's shack, was a frequent visitor to rehearsals. He sat in that house writing and listening to music and plotting and planning everything that pertained to the music and to the band. And just being very, very creative all the time. Not feeding himself, not shopping, not showering, not preening, not doing all the dozens of things normal people do. Kurt didn't bother with that. He had stacks and stacks of notebooks that were full of ramblings that he would pluck lyrics out of for his songs. So when they would come to rehearsal, he was ready. He was locked and loaded. He spent a tremendous amount of time working at all hours. That's the way Kurt was. New songs like Mexican Seafood and Hairspray Queen were very much influenced by the edgy punk of acts like Butthole Surfers and Scratch Acid. Hairspray Queen in particular also has a scratchy guitar line right out of the Gang of Four Au Pair school. Chris describes such songs as, quote, real alt-rock, really original, trying to be brainy or trying to be interesting. You know what I mean? And Mexican Seafood, it's actually kind of funk. That song takes a few hard turns. It's a very rhythmic song. It's alt-rock, not just straight-ahead big riff rock. Both songs are lyrically busy. Mexican Seafood draws on Kurt's interest, some would say obsession, with bodily functions, while Hairspray Queen is more free associative, particularly in the wordplay of mind and mine. Kurt professed to spend little time on his lyrics. I don't consider lyrics a big deal at all, he said in 1989. As long as it has a good melody line, a hook and live energy is far more important. I remember Kurt explaining to me one day how he wrote vocal lines, says Ryan. He said, I don't even do words. I sort of write the vocal melody with consonants and vowels and just go blah 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 blah. After he got it all phrased out, he would go through his notebooks and begin plugging words to see how they fit. And as the song began to take shape, he started playing around with the words again to see how you could twist them into meaning something. To him, making the words mean something was the last thing. And then the words would change. You would go to a show at the Community World Theater in Tacoma and then a show at the Squid Row in Seattle, and the same song would be different. Because quite honestly, he didn't remember the words. But there certainly was big riff rock as well, as evidenced by new songs like Pencap Chew and Aero Zeppelin. That was a joke, Chris says of the latter song. That was a riff-o-rama, a bunch of riffs put together. Both Aero Zeppelin and If You Must also offer something of a critique of the music business. If You Must is in part concerned with the pressure of having to write a song, while Aero Zeppelin ridicules the mindless fans who blindly follow any act if it's been properly branded. It was the kind of commentary that might be expected from the later day Kurt, who routinely disparaged rock stardom, but was surprising for a band whose performances had so far been limited to practices in a tiny room. That was about to change, however. The unnamed band's first attempt to play somewhere else besides Kurt's house, a party in Olympia, was over before it even began when the expectant trio arrived at their destination to find a next-door neighbor already complaining about the noise. I loaded up Chris' bass stuff in my car and Chris rode with Kurt, Aaron recalls. We all met up at this house party and there was just a mass of people. But as we were going in, some lady next door was screaming, I called the cops, you'll be shut down. So we all get in the house and they had all the band stuff in there but we couldn't play. The musicians returned home in defeat. Soon after that, in March, Ryan helped set up a date at another house party. I inserted myself into this thing, he says. I was very industrious. Ryan was friends with a guitarist named Tony Pakula, a former roommate of his who'd also been in a local band called Black Ice. Tony was now living in Raymond, a small town 20 miles south of Aberdeen, with his friend Jeff Franks, who was a drummer. There was a good music community back then, says Tony. Hoping to find a place to play for his friends other than the shack, Ryan approached Tony about having them play at his home. Sure, bring him down, Tony said. Always having a party here. There's always some beer. Have him come over. So the next week, I'm up in Aberdeen and I'm saying we should do this, says Ryan. It probably took a week or two to convince them. It was one of those deals where I said, look, I'll get the van, I'll haul the gear, I've got the money, I'll put the gas in the tank. All you've got to do is just show up. They didn't know these people, so they were self-conscious about it. I said, well, it's Tony. You remember Tony. He's a nice guy. It'll be fine. We'll have fun, get a case of beer, turn it into a party. So basically, that's how it all happened. I just pushed it by financing the whole thing. A Saturday night date was finally agreed on. Author Jeff Burlingame cites March 7th in his Kurt biography, and Ryan, who worked as a carpet layer for Benny's Quality Floors, borrowed the company van to drive the group including Kurt's girlfriend Tracy Mirander and Chris' girlfriend Shelley, over to Raymond. It was our first show, obviously we were all excited about playing, says drummer Aaron Burkhardt, who was also pleased he'd be able to use the host drum kit. Tony had a mint drum set, so I was like, cool, we don't have to load my crappy set. Nonetheless, he admits to feeling somewhat intimidated by the partygoers. We called them socias. High class, just better than us kind of people, he says, referring to the terminology in S.E. Clinton's classic novel, The Outsiders. The rest of the group also felt a bit out of place, as the party attendees were far from the punk rockers they were used to hanging out with in Aberdeen, even though they'd been classmates of Tony's. Their coming down to Raymond was just a bunch of old friends of mine coming over to my house to play some music, Tony says. Part of it was our own fault because we dressed like bums, Ryan recalls. Tracy was from Olympia, and she would wear kind of bizarre clothing. Kurt would wear kind of ratty clothing. Chris, who was able to socialize very well, would wear kind of weird, quirky clothes. Shelley's dressed in all black, and I'm wearing the black leather jacket, denim jeans with gigantic gaping thrashed holes. My pants looked like that because I was a carpet layer, and then it was cold, so you'd wear long johns. They were probably dirty, and we wouldn't wash our hair, so it would stick up and be greasy. We would go to a show in Tacoma or Olympia or Seattle, that's how all the kids looked. But when we would show up somewhere socially in Aberdeen or Hoquiam, that's not the way the kids looked. So we walk into the room and we've got an attitude. We've got a scowl on our face. We're not really sure we want to be there. If you ever been in one of those situations where you walk into a room and you go, hey, no one told me it wasn't a costume party. That's the way it was. And we feel awkward. We're waiting for someone to walk up to us and say, hey, you guys got here. We've been waiting for you all night. But that never happened. Nonetheless, Jeff Franks made sure to record the show on a Sony Walkman, thus preserving Nirvana's first non-rehearsal show. We were always recording our sessions, says Tony. Most of the time with a 4-track. But this time I think Jeff had this little stereo Sony Walkman recorder just running out of habit. I remember standing in our kitchen and him opening his jacket, revealing the recorder with the stereo mic clipped to his collar. Because Tony and Jeff were used to jamming with people who came by their house, they'd assumed that would be the case tonight. But when Tony picked up his guitar, he says it, quote, quickly became apparent that Jeff and I were not going to be able to play. Ryan came over to me and said they're not much for jamming with others, so I set my guitar down, grabbed a beer, and enjoyed the show. The band warmed up with Downer, which had progressed markedly since its appearance on the Fecal Matter demo tape, most noticeably in the faster tempo. After a break, Kurt indulges in a lengthy bit of feedback before finally launching into Aero Zeppelin. It's the first time we hear the drawling vocal style that will become very much part of Nirvana's sound, although here, the pounding riffs emulating the band's name checked in the song's title take precedence. Even accounting for the extended intro, the song runs almost 6 minutes. It would later be tightened up to just under 5 minutes. One thing that Kurt would do is when he arranged a tune, he'd tend to drive the riff into the ground, Chris later explained. And so I would come in and say, well, we need to do that riff half as long. There's little response from the audience, who can be heard chatting amiably between songs, and the pauses in the recording make the event seem less of a continuous show than a party occasionally interrupted by a few songs. The band are hardly the focal point. Nevertheless, however, they persevere, going into If You Must, with Kurt's keening vocal matched by the instrumental drone that was also key to Nirvana's sound. And when Kurt goes up an octave during the bridge, the song surges with power. After another break, the group goes into a cover, prompted by Chris' constant noodling on the opening riff of Zeppelin's Heartbreaker. Kurt eventually joins in, providing the crowd with a taste of something more conventional, even though Chris' over-the-top vocal suggests that, for the band at least, there was also an element of parody. Kurt gamely obliges requests for a solo, then segues into Zeppelin's How Many More Times, with Chris and Aaron soon joining in. Now gaining some momentum, the band positively races through Mexican seafood. Then comes the grind of Pen Cap Chew, surely heavy enough for any Zeppelin fan, followed by a somewhat ragged spank-through which Kurt introduces as Breaking the Law, and which comes to a stuttering halt, causing someone to gaffe, "They messed up." It takes a few minutes for the band to start their next number, making 2 attempts at starting Hairspray Queen before they're able to get past the opening and finally turn in a solid yet thrash-heavy version, with Aaron Burkhart's cymbals very much at the forefront. The recording of the concert cuts off after a request for Stairway to Heaven. "We were really drunk," Kurt later remembered of the show, "so we started making spectacles of ourselves." Chris had been particularly high-spirited during the set, jumping on the console TV, then leaping through the living room window and running back inside the house via the kitchen. "Instead of just playing our show, we thought, why not have an event?" "It was an event," Chris explained. "I just remember getting drunk," says Aaron Burkhart. "I don't think we had a set list. I think we wrote down like 4 songs that we knew and the rest were just songs we were still practicing. But we played them anyway, you know?" And Chris found some of that fake vampire blood stuff and put it all over himself and kept jumping through the living room window and running back through the kitchen. So it was pretty crazy. Ryan Agar recalls Kurt simply walking off when he got tired of playing. Ryan then joined the other musicians jamming on Flipper's Sex Bomb as the party guests retreated to the kitchen. The visitors' attempts at being outrageous eventually began to get out of control, as Ryan realized when Tony came over to speak to him. "Hey, you know, things are getting a little out of hand," Tony said. "Maybe you guys should leave." "Really?" Ryan asked. "What do you mean?" "Well," Tony replied, "Chris is out there peeing on everyone's cars." "We were in the doorway between the living room and the kitchen when this happened," says Ryan. "And I remember peering out the window above the sink, looking up, and there's Chris. They had this big light outside, so you could see the rain coming down, and Chris has his shirt off, he's standing on top of the van, and he's peeing. I go outside, and people are going, why is he doing that? What's the matter with you guys? And I'm going, I'm sorry." Ryan's attempt at damage control was further hampered when he ran into Kurt talking to a young woman at the back door. She had one of those really done-up hairdos, he says, and Kurt's reciting the words to Hairspray Queen, and he was saying these obscenities to her. And I was just like, what are you telling her? And he says, well, she asked me what the lyrics to Hairspray Queen were. And I go, Kurt, those aren't the words to that song. And he goes, well, I know, but she doesn't, so screw her. And I was like, why are you guys doing this? This is exactly what I was worried about you doing. You guys acting like a bunch of crazy kids. And yet, that was partly the point. Because they'd actually offended people, the whole event had become a success, Ryan continues. There were really 2 ways it could have gone. It could have gone really great, where everybody went, wow, you guys are the next big thing. Where have you been all our lives? Or they could have been run out of town. And since they weren't greeted with praise and were run out of town, that constituted a success. Yeah, we offended them, and that's what we wanted to do, because we're punk rock. Aaron concurred with that assessment. The show was fun, but we didn't know how we went over, really, he says. But it sounded alright to us, you know. I guess we didn't care what other people thought. It took us a while to get packed up, to get everyone corralled, and I was pretty loaded, Ryan admits. After the anxiety of getting out of there and being like, okay, we're on the road, we're going home, nobody's hurt, I think we got everybody. I sort of had the adrenaline kind of wane and I realized I'm really drunk. And about that time, we were coming out of Raymond going up the hill to go over the pass there. And I remember people saying, your driving's not so hot. I pulled over and Aaron took over driving. I don't really remember much of the way home. In all the excitement, the band members remained unaware that their first show had been recorded, and none of the members ever received a copy of the tape. 17 years later, Heartbreaker would be the opening track on Nirvana's With the Lights Out box set. After the Raymond show, Chris introduced the song to the group that would become an integral part of the setlist for the next 6 years, Love Buzz. The song was originally recorded by the Dutch band Shocking Blue, who enjoyed an English-language US-UK hit with Venus in the early 70s. Chris found the song off a self-titled American compilation of the band's work that had been given to him by a friend who picked it up at Dill's secondhand store in Aberdeen. The whole beauty of Dill's was that everything was a buck, says Ryan. It didn't matter what it was. Every record was $1, and so if you found a gem, you really had something, because you were only going to pay $1 for it. Ryan, of course, being Ryan Agar, a close friend of the band's. I put the record on as I was getting ready for work, and I thought, goodness, this is great, Chris recalls. And that song came on, and I was like, this is a really cool song. When Kurt came over the next day, Chris wasted no time in playing him the record. Check this song out, he said. Isn't it cool? Kurt agreed, and suggested the band do a cover of it, although they didn't bother telling Aaron it wasn't an original number. We played that song for 6 months before I even knew it was a cover, says drummer Aaron Burkhardt. I mean, it's not like we sat down and Kurt put it on and said, this is the way it goes. I just figured Kurt wrote a new song. In fact, there are few similarities between their version and Shocking Blue's original. The Eastern flavor of the Shocking Blue version comes through strongly in its use of the sitar. The song was also taken at a moderate tempo, and has a harsher feel due to the stentorian lead vocal of Mariska Veris, who sounded not unlike Grace Slick. Kurt only learned the song's first verse and chorus, changing the original lyrics King of My Dreams to Queen of My Heart. Intriguingly, he also changes Hear My Love Buzz to Feel My Love Buzz. Despite the lack of sitar, the guitar and bass nonetheless managed to create a suitable Eastern-sounding drone, with the song's instrumental break allowing Kurt to indulge himself by creating squalling feedback. The whole idea of a cover is to have some fun, he explained to Melody Maker. We've never bothered to do a straight copy, and we've never tried to pull a song apart in order to learn it properly. We'd rather just get on and do it. Christ agrees. We never tried to, quote, cover the song. We kind of did our own version of it. It took on a life of its own. Kurt found another song for the band to play, White Lace and Strange by Philadelphia trio Thunder and Roses. Once again, Aaron Burkhardt was unaware that the song was a cover. The song was the opening track on the band's soul album, 1969's King of the Black Sunrise. It sounded just like Cream or something, says Christ, because it was so straight ahead. We didn't have a whole heck of a lot of songs in our repertoire, so we'd throw in a few covers, and we weren't going to do metal covers, we thought we'd do something obscure. We like to have fun too, you know. Nirvana's version of the song was a good deal more roll-licking than the earnest original, and taken at a much faster clip. They make no attempt to replicate the chorus harmonies, and the song's instrumental break is scaled back to a brief 30 seconds. It's the kind of song a band kicks into when they're taking a break from more serious work. A more important addition to the set was a new original number, Floyd the Barber. In contrast to the more complex numbers like Beeswax or Mexican Seafood, songs written only a few months previously, Floyd the Barber is positively stark in its simplicity and thus packs more of an emotional punch. The song takes on the genteel setting of Mayberry, a fictional small town in the 60s sitcom The Andy Griffith Show, and laces it with black humor, as the luckless protagonist who visits Floyd Lawson's barber shop finds himself strapped to a chair, sexually assaulted, and slashed with razors by the show's characters. Like David Lynch's depictions of small-town life in Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, the song delights in exposing the dark undercurrents, swirling beneath a seemingly idyllic setting. It would become one of the most durable songs in Nirvana's repertoire. The band's first non-party show came on April 18, 1987, when the band played the Community World Theater in Tacoma, a blue-collar city 80 miles from Aberdeen. The theater was a former movie house, and the show was booked through Kurt's girlfriend Tracy, who knew the booker, Jim May. Needing some kind of a name for the show, the group settled on Skid Row. Kurt wrote the name in big block letters on the pink suitcase he'd used as a drum on his Organized Confusion demo, and that he was now carrying guitar parts and cables in. The Community World Theater would be their regular venue for the next year. They were crazy shows, says Aaron Burkhardt. I just remember it being cold. It was always cold in the theater, and Chris was always wrapped in a blanket. But they were fun. The shows never drew a big crowd, but helped the fledgling band develop a following, with Ryan loyally driving his friends to the shows. I generally provided vehicles, particularly early on, because I was a carpet layer and we had carpet vans that were readily available. He explains. I would lie to my boss and tell him a friend of mine was moving or whatever, and I could thus borrow the van for the night. I wouldn't tell him that I was driving a band halfway across the state and there's probably a bunch of beer involved. I didn't tell him things like that. One of the other bands on the bill was Nisqually Delta Podunk Nightmare, which featured Slim Moon and Dylan Carlson, who had each been favorably impressed by Kurt's one-off performance with the Melvins the previous year. They gave Skid Row the thumbs up as well. You could definitely tell Kurt was going into Gang of Four at the time, Dylan observed. a lot more complex rhythm, a herky-jerky kind of sound. Slim recalled Kurt being, quote, very glammed out. He wore platinum boots and this crazy outfit, and all the songs seemed like a riff just played over and over and over again. But his singing was very engaging. I thought they were pretty cool. Skid Row's performance was strong enough that it led to the band's first show in Olympia, a town that would have a huge impact on the band's and especially Kurt's musical development. Olympia was home to the Evergreen State College, a non-traditional institution where students designed their own program of study and received evaluations instead of grades. Evergreen encouraged innovation and progressive thinking among its student body, and attracted people interested in taking an active role in shaping their own education, with the result that Olympia had a much richer streak of unconventionality than was usual in a college town. They would allow outsiders to come there and throw wild parties, Buzz Osborne recalled. Any town that has something like that will have alternative culture as well, you know. A town that doesn't have it, it's not going to have punk rock shows. It's not going to have people from the outside coming in, bringing their ideas and wanting to do things along those lines for like-minded people. Olympia had that solely as a result of that college. Evergreen's radio station, Chaos, became one of the foremost alternative stations in the country, after John Foster, originally hired as the station's record librarian, changed the station format in the late 70s, to one mandating that 80% of the music broadcast had to be on an independent label. Chaos Radio was one of the few stations in the country, in fact, I think it might have been the only station in the country, that had an independent music policy, said Bruce Pavitt, an Evergreen student and music fan, who was excited by the wide range of music the station aired. Bruce was originally from Park Forest, a suburb of Chicago, and after 2 years at Blackburn College in Carlinville, Illinois, he transferred to Evergreen, where, he liked to say, he majored in punk rock. Bruce was inspired not only by John's work at Chaos, but also by the magazine he co-founded, OP, which initially appeared as an insert in the Chaos program guide. Its first standalone issue was published in August of 1979. OP covered independent artists from A to Z, quite literally, with each issue writing about artists whose names started with A, then B, then C, right on through the rest of the alphabet. Accordingly, the magazine's run ended after 26 issues. In addition to being a Chaos DJ and a member of two bands, Tiny Hole and War with Elevators, Bruce also interned at OP, and, before long, decided to put out his own publication. In 1980, he published the first issue of a zine he called Subterranean Pop. By issue 3, the name was shortened to Sub Pop. The Sub Pop fanzines featured record reviews organized regionally, which was unique, says Bruce. It was the only magazine in the country solely devoted to US indies. No real band features per se. Sub Pop covered a lot of records from more obscure regional scenes, and always provided addresses. Pre-internet, it was an excellent information source for obscure indie discs. As the editorial in the third issue put it, we have to decentralize our society and encourage local art and things in music. Bruce published 9 issues of Subterranean Pop Sub Pop between 1979 and 83. Issues 5, 7, and 9 were cassette zines, essentially compilation tapes. I was writing about a lot of music that people really had a hard time getting access to, so releasing cassettes of demo tapes from some of these groups seemed to make sense, he explains. The cassettes not only featured acts from the Northwest, but around the country as well. With a canny eye towards marketing, Bruce tapped a fellow Evergreen student, Charles Burns, to illustrate the cassette J-cards, aware that the black and white artwork would more readily capture attention when reproduced in a magazine. Tapes were sold for $4 a piece on generic tape or $5 for higher quality normal bias cassette. I paid my rent and electric bill for a year just off these cassettes, Bruce later explained. Bruce's work in turn inspired another Evergreen student and music fan, Calvin Johnson, who also DJ'd at Chaos and wrote for OP, in addition to contributing to Sub Pop both as a writer and artist. He appeared on Sub Pop 5 as a member of the Cool Rays, his first recorded appearance, and on Sub Pop 9 in the group Laura, Heather, and Calvin. Noting the success Bruce had with his inexpensively produced cassettes, Calvin decided to launch his own label, K Records. The K stood for knowledge, he explained, with the first release being the tape Survival of the Coolest by Olympia band Supreme Cool Beings in 1982. K's 1984 compilation tape, Let's Together, featured the first Melvins recording. The same year also saw the release of K's first vinyl record, the single Our Secret / What's Important by Calvin's latest band, Beat Happening, produced by Greg Sage of Portland band The Wipers. All of this made Olympia a fertile and welcoming environment for a developing band. Slim was booking a May 1st show at a venue called Gesco, which was to feature his own band Nisqually Delta Podunk Nightmare, and another Olympia act, Danger Mouse, with a cover charge of $2.50. Having enjoyed Skid Row's show the previous month, he asked if they would like to play as well. The set almost didn't happen though. Right before the band went on stage, an inebriated Chris was deemed too drunk to go on. But the band was finally allowed to play due to the fact that it was Gesco's closing night. Allison Wolfe, who later formed the band Bratmobile, was in the audience. "It was great," she said. "I remember feeling like something big was happening." Even though no one was there, the band was the perfect blend of 70s punk, but it also had this Zeppelin feel to it. The resulting performance also led to Skid Row's first radio performance. Evergreen students John Goodmanson and Donna Dresch were members of Danger Mouse, and John in particular was fascinated by Skid Row's antics. He recalls the standout being when Kurt would, quote, jump in the air and do the splits, while wearing these weird, really tall clogs, like the same platform shoes Slim Moon had noticed Kurt wearing during Skid Row's Community World Theater performance, and which Kurt had purchased at Dill's second-hand store. As John Goodmanson recalls, quote, that was quite a performance-like rock moment. He also played with a delay pedal, which was not punk rock. And I did as well, so we kind of bonded on that geek-out level. I remember after they played, Donna getting mad at me. She was like, "You like them better than us, don't you?" And I was like, mm-hmm. I was super into them. I really dug their whole trip. It seemed so fresh and exciting. I was a big fan of older school punk rock stuff, like Social Distortion and stuff like that, but I liked the 70s punk stuff too, and it seemed like a really potent combination of that. John and Donna each hosted radio shows which ran back-to-back on Chaos. The Toy Train Crash Backside Bone Beefcake Show, and the other show, Out of Order. I was like 19, how embarrassing, says John of his show's name. But that's what it was called. The shows also featured live sets by local bands and other acts passing through town. And, right after the Gesco show, John made arrangements for Skid Row to appear. The show's exact date is uncertain. John says the shows were broadcast on Monday nights, but a cassette tape labeled Out of Order, pictured in the Cobain book Cobain on Scene, has a date of May 6, 1987, a Wednesday. It was a good break for us to do that, says Christ. According to Ryan Agar, Kurt certainly saw it as a step up. I think it was sort of the legitimacy of the show, he says. I know Kurt really didn't want to play in Raymond. He wasn't really happy about that. Kind of a constant theme throughout Kurt's career, to me, was that he was a little bit critical of his audience. He wanted to respect his audience, and his audience needed to be a certain caliber of character. And if he didn't like who was listening to him, it disturbed him. And I think that may have had something to do with the quality of the performance in Raymond. He didn't like what was going on there. It wasn't worthy. He was a little bit of a snob in that way. And Chaos was an entirely different thing. Chaos was exactly the kind of audience that he wanted. Despite striking him as, quote, tough kids from Aberdeen, John found Skid Row easy to work with. Chris was always a sweetheart, he says. Kurt was pretty quiet, and the drummer was this metal dude. He had a funny mustache. He was way more macho than anybody else, but they didn't seem intimidated. Cause it's so low-key at Chaos, it's super casual. It's goofy community radio stuff. There was just a little 6-channel mono mixer. There wasn't much of anything else there to even do a sound check with. John decided to record the show on tape. I was just super into it, which was why I committed to it on a 2-track machine. And even recording at high speed, which for somebody as broke as me at the time was a big deal. Then, I'd have it, and I could play songs later on other radio shows. It would be the second known recording of the band. The tape I made was from the production room, which was where the nice reel-to-reel machine was, John explains. So it's not a tape of the air feed. I would go in there and get everything ready and then go in with the band. And Donna would be doing the radio show. We had 4 hours, so she would be doing an hour of regular radio and telling people what was coming up. And then in hour 2, we'd cut over to the band live in the studio. There was no way to easily communicate with a band while they were performing, however. On the tape, you can hear some confusion, says John. Like, are we done yet? What do you want us to play? It was really like, they're in a 10 by 10 concrete room, and somebody's poking their head in the room going, come on guys, let's play another song. And that's all way off mic, super quiet. Then the band has to talk about what song to play, and then they play it. Those big gaps in between songs are college radio-style dead air. Everything's turned way down because everybody's screaming and there are no compressors at a college radio station, which means there's no way to get a microphone level up to just talking in between songs, so everything dies down and it's really quiet. I turned up the vocal channel really loud to try and hear somebody talking about the next song, and then the first note of the next song would be incredibly loud. According to Aaron, Kurt chose the songs for the performance. He made the set list, although we probably had a little bit of a say in it, he says. It was mostly all Kurt's project. You know, these are the songs we're going to do. We just agreed. The set goes off to a good start with Love Buzz, already recognized as one of the group's strongest numbers, or maybe the fact that it was a new addition to the set list made it something of a novelty. The cascading guitar intro sounds much the same as it would when the band professionally recorded it a little more than a year later. Although at this stage, the lyrics have been distilled to the first line of the first verse and the sole line of the chorus, with Kurt taking great delight in shrieking out the word buzz. The song's 2 instrumental breaks allow for the usual playful guitar improvisation. The second break is especially twisted. But it's Kurt's voice that makes the strongest impression. On Love Buzz in particular, Kurt's drawling vocal walks a thin line between parody and seriousness, the kind of technique that Queen's Freddie Mercury was the master of. Are we still on? What's with all the hubbub? Kurt asks before launching into Floyd the Barber. Floyd is taken a tad slower than it would be in its final version, making it somewhat plodding here, although Kurt's glee in delivering the sinister lyric is obvious. Downer is faster than the Fecal Matter version, but again, not as fast as it would be. In contrast to the earnestness of Downer, Mexican Seafood swings with raucous fun, even though Kurt's vocals are buried in the barrage of sound. There is then another brief pause with Kurt again asking, "What? Are we still on?" Before the suggestion is made to perform White Lace and Strange, which the band had first played at the Gesco show, the song races along with gusto. Indeed, the band invests noticeably more energy into this song than they do their original songs. Part of this was undoubtedly due to a lack of self-consciousness. Because the song was a throwaway, there was no need to take it seriously. Thus, the band relaxed and turned in a highly spirited performance of a song they'd never play live again. Spank Through continued the mixing of musical genres. Along with the hard rock of Floyd the Barber and the arty punk of Mexican Seafood, Spank Through was fairly unadulterated hard pop, albeit undercut by Kurt's over-the-top vocals, his drawl alternating with his stretched-out scream. The pace instantly changes with the charging guitar intro of Aneurysm, but while the verses are trademark heavy metal riffage, and most of Kurt's delivery akin to the yelping of Mexican Seafood, during the bridge the music suddenly takes a Melvins-like swing into something slower, and that melodic, hypnotic drone so much a part of Nirvana's sound is instantly recognizable. After a few tantalizing seconds, however, the song heads back just as suddenly into a more frantic terrain. Hairspray Queen sounds more confident in comparison to The Raymond Show, Kurt switching between the harsh, softer vocal delivery with ease, although his energy flags a bit over the course of the song. This is even more evident in Pen Cap Chew, with Kurt not even bothering to sing all the lyrics at times, instead screaming or moaning out nonsense syllables. "That's it," Kurt announces at the end of the song. But in fact, there was one more number, which unusually only featured bass and drums, with Kurt free associating a lyric, perhaps not dissimilar to the material he performed with Buzz and Dale at Gesco the previous year. A bootlegger entitled the piece, "Help Me, I'm Hungry," after a line in the song, which is how it was titled when it was later released on the With the Lights Out box set. White Lace and Strange and Aneurysm also appear on the box as well. Today, the track is known in trading circles as Vendetta Against, a deduction made from the fact that the phrase appears both as a lyric in the song and on an early Nirvana setlist. The very next day, we showed up for practice, and Kurt had this easel with a big sheet of paper on it, Aaron recalls. He drew a big picture of a pen with its cap all chewed up. That was our new name. We were Pen Cap Chew. That was kind of a weird transformation. I don't know where he got it from. Kurt also wrote the new name on his pink suitcase. "We had a new name every week. We'd get kind of bored of them," Chris explains. A rehearsal tape from this period survives and has 2 more new numbers in their only known performances. One was later entitled Mrs. Buttersworth when included on the With the Lights Out box set. It's an up-tempo, driving number that suddenly lurches into comedy in the middle during a spoken word section, the only such section in any Nirvana song, in which Kurt imagines himself selling trinkets at a flea market, an idea he'd return to later. The other number begins with a repetitive 2-note drone, which Kurt then imitates, the guitar lines spiraling up and down like a ball slowly going up in the air, only to come back down to earth. Largely instrumental, it may have been more of a jam than a proper song, and, in any case, neither it nor Mrs. Buttersworth were taken any further. The band's next show, at the Community World Theater on June 27th, was indeed under the name Pen Cap Chew. After that, their momentum stalled. The band's only other confirmed show of the year was on August 9th, 1987, again at the Community World Theater, this time under the name Bliss. Part of the problem was logistical. After the Chaos show, Kurt moved in with his girlfriend Tracy in Olympia. Chris and his girlfriend Shelley moved to Tacoma, and Aaron remained in Aberdeen. With the band members now living in 3 different places, they had to make a considerable effort to practice together. And with no regular venues other than the Community World Theater interested in having them perform, there was no great incentive to make that effort. Everything just kind of fell apart, says Chris. Not until 1992, in the first flush of Nirvana's mainstream success, would every member of the band again be living in the same city. Where Nirvana's first ever concerts took place, that's what I'm going to be showing you, and the history behind those early concerts. I'm also going to show you where Kurt Cobain got arrested in his hometown Aberdeen, the famous bridge associated with Something in the Way, Nirvana's early practice venues, Kurt Cobain's original childhood house, and more. After that, I'm going to read to you a segment from Nirvana biographer Jillian G. Garr where she discusses in great detail the history of early Nirvana. And at the very end of this video, I'm going to show you my interview with Nirvana's official original drummer, Aaron Burkhardt. That interview took place in front of Kurt Cobain's famous house near the bridge in Aberdeen. I went to Aberdeen, Seattle, and other nearby areas in 2020 to explore these important locations and early concert venues. Let's jump into it. Hey guys, so believe it or not, this is the location where Nirvana's first ever concert took place on March 7th, 1987, inside of a small house on the outskirts of a town called Raymond, about 40 minutes south of Aberdeen. Now, before I continue, I want to mention that I did speak with the homeowners and I did get their permission to be taking these shots of the house, so a big thank you to them. As is the case with all the Nirvana locations I visited, these places are all public domain information as they are listed in the official Nirvana biographies, but regardless, whenever possible, I do think it's a good practice to ask the permission of the homeowners. In 1987, Nirvana's lineup at the time consisted of Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, and Aaron Burkhardt. As mentioned, this concert took place at the outskirts of a town called Raymond. The exact spot where the band performed was right here in this corner. That's where the living room of this house is. It should be noted that at this point in time, the band still wasn't known as Nirvana. They didn't even have an official name yet. That's how early in Nirvana's story this concert took place. And so you may be wondering, why Raymond? If the band was really in its infancy, why go out of town for its first show? Let's get into it. The person who arranged the Raymond gig was Ryan Egner. Ryan was a high school friend of Kurt and Chris who would frequently hang out at Nirvana rehearsals, so much so that he ended up becoming the de facto manager of the band in their early days. Recalling his time with Nirvana, Ryan had the following to say about Kurt during those early days. He was writing and listening to music and plotting and planning everything that pertained to music and to the band. And just being very, very creative all the time. Not feeding himself, not shopping, not showering, not preening, not doing all the dozen things that normal people do. Kurt didn't bother with that. He had stacks and stacks of notebooks that were full of these ramblings that he would pluck lyrics out of for his songs. So when they would come to rehearsal, he was ready. He was locked and loaded. He spent a tremendous amount of time working at all hours. That's the way Kurt was. Ryan was friends with a guitarist named Tony Pokula, a former roommate of his who was also in a local band called Black Ice. By this point in time, Tony had moved to Raymond. One day in early 1987, Ryan asked Tony if it would be alright for Nirvana to come down to Raymond and play a show at his house, as a means of getting the band some experience outside of their rehearsals in Aberdeen. In response, Tony said, quote, "Sure, bring him down. Always having a party here. There's always some beer. Have them come over." End quote. And so now having the green light, Ryan approached Nirvana and pitched the idea to them. In Ryan's own words, quote, "So the next week I'm up in Aberdeen and I'm saying we should do this." It probably took a week or two to convince them. It was one of those deals where I said, look, I'll get the van, I'll haul the gear, I've got the money, I'll put the gas in the tank. All you've got to do is just show up. They didn't know these people, so they were self-conscious about it. I said, well, it's Tony. You remember Tony. He's a nice guy. It'll be fine. We'll have fun. Get a case of beer, turn it into a party. So basically that's how it all happened. I just pushed it by financing the whole thing. After some time, a date was finally picked for when the concert would take place. Saturday, March 7th. In order to get the band to Raymond, Ryan, who at the time worked as a carpet layer for a company named Benny's Quality Floors, borrowed the company van and drove the band down to Raymond himself. In addition to Ryan, Kurt, Chris, and Aaron Burkhardt, Kurt's girlfriend Tracy Mirander and Chris' girlfriend Shelley Dilly came along for the ride as well. They arrived at the house at about 9:30 p.m. Upon arrival, they felt a bit out of place, especially Kurt. One of the partygoers, Vale Steffens, recalls the following, quote, "When I saw what the band looked like, I said, uh-oh. They looked very different from the crowd we hung out with." End quote. The attendees at the party were far from the punk rockers that the Aberdeen natives were used to hanging out with. Many of the people at the party wearing Led Zeppelin shirts with mullet haircuts. Inside the house there was a Def Leppard poster, Metallica artwork. It was a very different scene than the one the band was accustomed to. In Aaron Burkhardt's own words, quote, "We called them socias. High class, just better than us kind of people." End quote. Regarding the awkwardness of the situation, Ryan recalls the following. "Part of it was our own fault because we dressed like bums. Tracy would wear kind of ratty clothing. Chris, who was able to socialize very well, would wear kind of weird, quirky clothes. Shelley's dressed all in black, and I'm wearing the black leather jacket, denim jacket jeans with gigantic gaping thrashed holes. My pants looked like that because I was a carpet layer, and then it was cold, so you'd wear these long johns. They were probably dirty. And we wouldn't wash our hair, so it would stick up and be greasy. We would go to a show in Tacoma or Olympia or Seattle. That's how all the kids looked. But when we would show up socially in small towns, that's not the way the kids looked. So we walk into the room and we've got an attitude. We've got a skull on our face. We're not really sure we want to be there." If you've ever been in one of those situations where you walk into a room and you go, "Hey, no one told me it was a costume party," that's the way it was. And we feel awkward. We're waiting for someone to walk up to us and say, "Hey, you guys got here. We've been waiting for you all night." But that never happened. Regardless, however, of the awkwardness of the situation, Tony Pakula's friend Jeff made sure to record the audio for the show on his Sony Walkman. As Tony recalls, "We were always recording our sessions, most of the time with a 4-track, but this time I think Jeff had his little stereo Sony Walkman recorder running just out of habit. I remember standing in our kitchen and him opening his jacket, revealing the recorder with the stereo mic clipped to his collar." In addition to the audio recording of the show, there are a few photos of the show available online as well. In 2015, Tony's then 19-year-old daughter Maggie posted photos of the show online. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Maggie had the following to say, "I had no idea that those were during Nirvana's first concert. My dad showed me them a while back, but he never mentioned that's what was going on in the photos. I found out because of all the articles. I didn't realize it was such a historical thing. I thought they were just cool pictures of my dad and Kurt jamming together." Now, in terms of the concert itself, it didn't end up going very smoothly. The first song the band performed was Downer, and there wasn't much of a response from the crowd, who were more engaged in their own conversations rather than paying attention to Nirvana. After Nirvana finished performing Downer, Tony Pakula grabbed his guitar and began approaching the band. At this point, Ryan then told Kurt that the evening had been described to Tony as a jam session. So in other words, this wasn't actually intended to be a solo Nirvana concert. Kurt was understandably surprised by this. He managed, however, to get out of it by saying the following to Tony. "Do you mind if we play through our set? I really don't know any poppy songs at all, and it's cool to improvise, but I only like to improvise when I'm drunk. That way I don't care." Tony himself recalls the following, quote, "It quickly became apparent that Jeff and I were not going to be able to play. Ryan came over to me and said they're not much for jamming with others, so I set my guitar down, grabbed a beer, and enjoyed the show." The next two songs Nirvana performed were Aero Zeppelin and If You Must, again, not getting a great response from the crowd. The following two songs Nirvana performed were Heartbreaker and How Many More Times, both Led Zeppelin covers. The audience responded more positively to the Zeppelin covers than they did to Nirvana's original material. And so with a bit of momentum now, the band went back to their original material, playing Mexican Seafood, Pencap Chew, Spank Through, and Hairspray Queen. By this point of the concert, things had really begun to go off the rails. Chris Novoselic had walked off from the performance area. When Kurt went to look for him, Kurt found Chris on top of Ryan's van, urinating on the other cars nearby. Aaron Burkhardt recalls the following. "I just remember getting really drunk, and Chris found some of that fake vampire blood and put it all over himself, and kept jumping through the living room window and running around back into the kitchen. So it was pretty crazy." Chris' girlfriend, Shelley Dilly, even ended up getting into a fist fight with one of the partygoers, Vale Steffens. The whole thing by the end of it had just gone completely sideways, but in a sense, that's actually what the band wanted. In Chris' own words, "Instead of just playing the show, we thought, why not have an event?" It was an event. According to Ryan, he remembers Kurt walking off when he got tired of playing. Ryan then joined in with other musicians jamming on Flipper's song Sex Bomb. Kurt has claimed that Sex Bomb's jam lasted between 30 to 60 minutes, but various others have stated that is not the case. Regardless, that was the end of the concert. And as chaotic as it was, the band actually considered the concert somewhat of a success, even getting a few compliments from the audience at the end of it. But one of the other reasons that the band considered the gig somewhat of a success is because they had gotten under people's skin with their antics. In Ryan's words, because they'd actually offended people, the whole event had become a success. There were really two ways it could have gone. It could have gone really great, where everyone went, wow, you guys are the next big thing. Where have you been all our lives? Or they could be run out of town. And since they weren't greeted with praise, and we were run out of town, that constituted a success. Yeah, we offended them, and that's what we wanted to do because we're punk rock. After all was said and done, the Nirvana crew got back inside of Ryan's van and headed off back to Aberdeen. According to Tony's friend Jeff Frank, quote, they all sat in the back of the van with the rear door still open, sitting on the rolls of carpet. We could see them pull the slider door down as they sped away with gravel spitting out from their tires. In Ryan's own words, after the anxiety of getting out of there and being like, okay, we're on the road, we're going home, nobody's hurt, and I think we've got everybody, I sort of had the adrenaline kind of wane and I realized I'm really drunk. And about that time, we were coming out of Raymond, going up the hill to go over the pass there. And I remember people saying, your driver's not so hot. I pulled over and Aaron took over driving. I don't really remember much of the way home. And that is the story of Nirvana's first concert. Cool enough, one of the Led Zeppelin covers from this performance, Heartbreaker, is the opening track on disc 1 of Nirvana's box set with the lights out. The fact that there is a recording of this Raymond show is definitely noteworthy, considering that there are a lot of huge bands out there that have no recordings of their early shows, let alone their first ever show. So now let's take a look at some details about Raymond itself. Aberdeen physically is almost twice as large as Raymond, and in terms of the population, Aberdeen's population is almost 6 times larger than Raymond's. Raymond has a population of approximately 3,000 people. Aberdeen has a population of approximately 17,000 people. So, although Aberdeen is a relatively small logging town, Raymond is truly a small logging town. Interestingly, since the 1980s, the population of Raymond has stayed almost the same, whereas Aberdeen's population has actually decreased by about 2,000 people. So, in other words, there were more people living in Aberdeen at the time that Kurt was there than there are now. But that's a separate subject altogether. Hey guys, this is the location of Nirvana's first ever concert as Nirvana, the former Community World Theater in Tacoma, Washington. Today, it functions as a church, but from parts of 1987 to parts of 1988, it was the Community World Theater, a very important concert venue in the story of Nirvana. The first time the band performed at the Community World Theater was on April 18, 1987. As a matter of fact, that concert was Nirvana's second concert ever. It happened about 5 weeks after the band's first ever concert on March 7, 1987. The first time they performed here under the name Nirvana was on March 19, 1988. Other names Nirvana has used up to this point in time included Pencap Chew, Bliss, Ted Ed Fred, and Skid Row. The band's lineup in early '88 consisted of Kurt Cobain and Chris Novoselic, with Dale Crover as a temporary drummer. Dale had actually been in the band since late '87, but it was always understood that his place in the band was only temporary until Kurt and Chris could find a permanent replacement for Aaron Burkhardt. By early 1988, Dale's other band, the Melvins, was scheduled to move to California, and so the band were now under pressure to find a permanent drummer. In March of 1988, they placed a Musicians Wanted ad for a drummer in The Rocket, a former Seattle-based biweekly newspaper focused on local music in the Pacific Northwest, but it didn't pan out. Dale Crover recommended that Dave Foster, another drummer from Aberdeen, take his place in the band, and with that recommendation, Dave Foster became the new drummer in Nirvana. Dave Foster was the drummer in the band during the March 19, 1988 show at the Community World Theater, meaning that Nirvana's lineup at their first ever show as Nirvana was Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, and Dave Foster. And this show cost only $5, which is kind of cool to think that the first ever concert the band performed at as Nirvana only cost $5. The following is a quote from Jillian G. Gar's Nirvana biography, Entertain Us, The Rise of Nirvana. Quote, Kurt had likely been thinking of the name Nirvana for some time. Not only was it used in the Rocket ad, it also appears in the song Paper Cuts when he sings the word several times. Asked about the name choice later, he told the fanzine, Matt Lucan's Legs, we needed something rough that would still let the babes know we are eager to please. A later explanation given to Submerge was more down to earth. There's no reason at all, it just sounded nice. End quote. As mentioned, the Community World Theater is an important venue in the history of Nirvana. It's a venue the band performed at multiple times in the early days, and is one of the places they began to hone their skills as a live act. In total, Nirvana played at the Community World Theater 6 times. The 6th and final performance at the Community World Theater was the March 19, 1988 show with Dave Foster as the drummer. Interestingly, Nirvana actually had a concert at the Community World Theater the same day they had their first ever studio recording session. On January 23, 1988, Nirvana recorded 10 songs with producer Jack Endino in Seattle at Reciprocal Recordings. Nirvana's lineup during this recording featured Dale Crover on drums. As a matter of fact, Jack Endino's band Skinyard had actually played with Dale's band the Melvins on multiple occasions. Dale's connection to Nirvana is largely why Jack Endino agreed to record Nirvana in the first place. Mind you, Nirvana was not yet known as Nirvana at the time of this recording. That night, on January 23, 1988, when they performed at the Community World Theater, they performed under the name Ted Ed Fred. The songs they played at the Community World Theater show on January 23rd were the exact same songs they had just recorded at Reciprocal Recordings earlier that day, in the exact same order. Those songs are If You Must, Downer, Floyd the Barber, Paper Cuts, Spank Through, Hairspray Queen, Aero, Zeppelin, Beeswax, Mexican Seafood, and Pencap Chew. Additionally, the band also played Ranchola and a cover of Zeppelin's Moby Dick at the Community World Theater performance that night as well. Hey guys, this is the Moore Theater in Seattle, a venue where Nirvana played 2 important shows. The first on June 9, 1989, as part of Sub Pop's Lame Fest, and the second on August 24, 1990, as part of Nirvana's tour with Sonic Youth. More on that in just a bit. Nirvana's lineup during the June 1989 show consisted of Kurt Cobain on vocals and guitar, Chris Novoselic on bass, Jason Everman on guitar, and Chad Channing on drums, whereas the August 24, 1990 show featured a lineup of Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, and Dale Crover on drums. As mentioned, the June 1989 show was part of Sub Pop's Lame Fest, which also featured Mudhoney and Tad. As a matter of fact, both Mudhoney and Tad were higher on the bill than Nirvana. Nirvana was the opening act and only played a handful of songs. Even so, this was an important show in terms of the development of Nirvana as a band, in terms of their growth as musicians. The following is a snippet from Gillian G. Gar's Nirvana biography, Entertain Us, The Rise of Nirvana. Quote, Nirvana opened the show, suddenly finding themselves spread out on the biggest stage they'd ever played. Chris stage left, Jason stage right, and Kurt in the center with Chad on a riser behind him. We were so used to playing small clubs and stuff, 3 feet away from each other pretty much, says Chad. And here, everybody seemed like they were miles away. It was the first time I played a show that was on a really big stage, and seeing how much different the sound plays. Because the sound was so much different, it's like you hear some reverberation from the drums, you hear an echo after everything that you play. It struggles with the timing in your head when you're playing. It's almost like there's somebody else playing this right next to you. The venue, the Moore Theater, had around 1,500 seats and usually featured out-of-town acts. 3 local bands playing at the Moore Theater was fairly unheard of at the time, says Mudhoney's Dan Peters, especially for a ragtag bunch like we all were. When that was being talked about doing a show there with us as the headliner, and we were all like, are they crazy? Nonetheless, the show sold out. It was a definite turning point, that show, Bruce Pavitt remembered. When Chad arrived at the theater, he looked up at the marquee, thinking it was kinda cool to see Nirvana's name there. His parents snapped a picture of the marquee and hung the photo on their wall. In addition to all this, the Lame Fest show was a notable one, largely due to the fact that throughout the night, the bands and the crowd got into scuffles with the security guards at the venue. The August 1990 show was a little bit tamer. That show, again as mentioned, was part of Nirvana's tour with Sonic Youth at a 7-show tour together between August 16th to 25th, 1990, the last show being in Vancouver, Canada, the second last show being here in Seattle, USA at the Moore Theater. One of the important things about this tour in particular is that Nirvana were introduced to Sonic Youth's manager John Silva, who soon ended up becoming Nirvana's manager. Furthermore, the tour gave Nirvana an opportunity to build on the interest they were getting from major labels. In particular, DGC's Mark Gate attended the first 2 shows of the tour. He recalls the following, quote, I remember checking them out and liking them, and just thinking, yeah, these guys are cool. There were clearly people that were aware of them and knew the songs. I remember noticing that there was definitely something going on there, and I probably said something to Gary Gersh, who was standing there at one of the shows with me. End quote. As per the August 24th show in Seattle, Sub Pop intern Rob Nyberg recalls the following, quote, you could feel the Nirvana train was definitely starting to chug a little harder, and people were paying more attention to them. End quote. Nirvana played a full set that night. The set list went as follows. Love Buzz, Scoff, Floyd the Barber, Dive, In Bloom, About a Girl, School, Spank Through Lithium, Been a Sun, Negative Creep, and Blue. Hey guys, this is the location of Nirvana's first ever show in Seattle, the Central Saloon. The show took place on April 16th, 1988. Now before I go any further, I should mention that according to Michael Azarad's Nirvana biography, Come As You Are, Nirvana's first show in Seattle was actually a week later, on April 24th, 1988, at the Vogue, as part of one of these Sub Pop Sunday showcases. However, the other Nirvana bios I've looked at have each said the first show was April 16th. Looking online, that's also what I'm seeing. Chris Novoselic, Bruce Pavitt, and Jonathan Poneman have also all said that it was April 16th. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to go ahead with the general consensus, which is that the first Nirvana show in Seattle took place on April 16th. The Central Saloon was one of the few Seattle venues at the time which welcomed bands who played original music instead of just covers. At the time of this performance, Nirvana didn't yet have a big following in Seattle. Most of their fans at this point in time were concentrated around Olympia and Tacoma. And so with that in mind, it's not surprising to hear that, according to Chris Novoselic, no one showed up at their show at the Central Saloon. Quote, "Nobody came. Nobody. Not one person. We didn't even play. We bought a 12-pack of beer, sat underneath the viaduct, and drank it. I think I drank most of it. And then just kind of said, oh well, shrugged our shoulders, maybe next time." As mentioned earlier, Jonathan Poneman and Bruce Pavitt from Sub Pop both agree that Nirvana's first show in Seattle was at the Central Saloon on April 16th, but according to them, the band did actually play to a small audience. Bruce Pavitt recalls the following impression he got of Nirvana from that show. None of their original material was outstanding in the least. And to see this band and think, this is going to be the biggest band in the world in 3 years? No way. I put that at about 1,000,000,000 to 1. Nirvana's lineup at the time of the show consisted of Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, and Dave Foster. As of the time of this recording in November of 2020, no recordings of this show have surfaced. It's not known if anyone even recorded this early Nirvana performance. The full set list for the performance is also not known, but it is known that the band did play Love Buzz that night. What's interesting to me about the documentation of this show is that different sources have very different opinions and recollections of what happened, i.e. Chris Novoselic compared to Jonathan Poneman and Bruce Pavitt. Considering this was Nirvana's first ever performance in Seattle, you'd think there'd be more documentation of it, but again, as at the time of this recording, there are still holes to fill in, which to be honest makes it more fun looking into the history of the band, considering there's still room for discovery. Now of course, the Central Saloon is not the only Seattle venue Nirvana has played at. Nirvana played at multiple venues across the city over the course of several years, but according to most sources, this is the first location they played at in Seattle. So if you're a fan of Nirvana in Seattle and you want to check out the venue they first performed at in the city, this is the place. Now, Nirvana isn't the only band to have played at this venue. Others who have played at the Central Saloon include Mother Love Bone, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, and Jimi Hendrix. The Central Saloon was founded back in the 1890s, making it one of the oldest venues in Seattle. The Central Saloon is located in the Pioneer Square neighborhood of Seattle, which is just south of downtown and about 10 minutes driving distance from the Space Needle. All in all, when it comes to music history in Seattle, this is a very important venue. This is the location of what may be the longest concert Nirvana ever had, the Off-Ramp in Seattle, now known as El Corazon. In total, Nirvana played 31 songs at the Off-Ramp. Nirvana's performance at the Off-Ramp is regarded by many of Nirvana's longtime fans as one of their best ever live performances. The show took place on November 25th, 1990. At this point in time, major labels were in hot pursuit of Nirvana. A&R reps from Columbia, RCA, Capitol, among others were all at this performance. This performance is notable for several reasons, one of them being that the band debuted multiple songs that night, such as Oh the Guilt, Something in the Way, Radio Friendly Unit Shifter, and Dumb. Rob Nyberg of Sub Pop recalls the following about the show. That's in my rock and roll top 10 of shows. It was the first show with Dave Grohl back in Seattle after they had just toured Europe, so you can see how he had settled into the band. It was an amazing show, just amazing, song after song after song. It's like they played their entire catalog. According to Nirvana biographer Jillian G. Garr, given the number of A&R reps in the audience, there was an excellent incentive for the band to showcase as much of their material as they could. But it was also clear that they were playing just for the sheer joy of it, enjoying themselves so much that as 2 a.m. approached, the cutoff time for liquor sales in Washington state, a plan was worked out so that the show could continue. Everyone left the club, the alcohol was locked up, the club reopened, and anyone who wanted to stay was readmitted. Nirvana went on to play at least another 11 songs, after having already played nearly 20. Now, there are various audio recordings of the concert available online, though these audio recordings are believed to be bootlegs. Nothing official has been released as of yet. It's not yet publicly known if there even is a quote-unquote official recording of the show. In addition to the A&R reps who were at the show, the venue was also packed with fans and various notable artists from the grunge scene. Dan Peters was one of those in attendance. Dan Peters, of course, had just been replaced 2 months earlier by Dave Grohl as the drummer for the band. But even so, he checked out the performance and was impressed by it. I thought they were great. I thought they made the complete right decision. When I saw Dave, it made complete sense to me why he was the drummer and I wasn't. After Nirvana performed Sliver that night, Chris Novoselic gave Dan Peters a shout out from the stage. Thanks, Danny. Dan Peters helped us write that song. Kim Thayil of Soundgarden was also at the show. And in his words, he thought the show was amazing. He's quoted as saying that Lithium in particular stuck out to him, and that Ben Shepherd, Soundgarden's bass player, came up to Kim and told him that Lithium is going to be a top 40 hit. Lithium was eventually released as a single on July 13, 1992, and it peaked at number 16 on Billboard's US mainstream rock charts. It was 2 days after the Off-Ramp show, the news came out that Nirvana had signed with DGC Records. So this show is a very important one in the story of Nirvana for multiple reasons. One of them being that it is one of Nirvana's longest shows, quite possibly Nirvana's longest show. Before I run through the set list, it should be noted that Nirvana's rendition that night of Dive lasted for less than 30 seconds, and their rendition of Where Did You Sleep Last Night lasted for less than a minute. Nevertheless, both songs are part of the band's 31-song set list from that night. The set list goes as follows: Aneurysm, Oh the Guilt, Mr. Moustache, Stay Away, Breed, Floyd the Barber, About a Girl, Verse Chorus Verse, In Bloom, Swap Meet, Been a Sun, Stain, Blue, Sappy, Lithium, School, D7, Here She Comes Now, Sliver, Dive, Dumb, Polly, Something in the Way, Negative Creep, Love Buzz, Where Did You Sleep Last Night, Spank Through, Molly's Lips, Son of a Gun, Sifting, and Radio Friendly Unit Shifter. This set list is comprised of songs that appeared on Bleach, songs that would appear on Nevermind and in Utero, as well as songs that were never released as part of any of the 3 official studio records. So this set list really is reflective of a lot of different eras of the band. And so for many reasons, this show is an iconic show in Nirvana's history. This is the first house Kurt Cobain ever lived in, and it's not in Aberdeen. It's actually in one of the towns directly across from Aberdeen, Hoquiam. Oftentimes people think that the yellow house in Aberdeen, the East First Street house, is the first one where Kurt Cobain lived, which of course is understandable because that location does get a lot of press. But truth be told, the East First Street house in Aberdeen is actually the third house Kurt Cobain lived in. This blue house in Hoquiam, this is the first house. I spoke with the next door neighbor of this house. His name is Bruce, and he mentioned that the landlord of the blue house is a very good friend of his, and that she wouldn't mind me taking a few video clips of the property. So a big thank you to both of them. It should be noted that this small house is actually located directly behind another house. It's small enough essentially to fit in someone's backyard. Speaking with Bruce, he told me something about this house that I thought was particularly noteworthy. He said that this house, in his own words, is basically like a revolving door of different tenants because most people don't stay here longer than a few months. I thought that was noteworthy because the Cobains, when they lived here, they were also only there for a very short period of time. As a matter of fact, they were only there for a few weeks. A few weeks after Kurt Cobain was born, the Cobain family moved to the larger house at the front of the property, which is where they stayed until September of 1969, which is when they purchased the house on East First Street. So Kurt Cobain was 2.5 years old when he moved to East First Street. So the very early part of his life took place mostly at the big house at the front of the property, and then the first few weeks, the preliminary few weeks, at the back house. Now, granted, when I say the big house at the front of the property, the bigger house is still a relatively small house. It's just in comparison to how tiny the house in the back is, the one in the front is about twice as large, even though it's still small. So that really should show you how small that little house is in the back. The addresses for these houses are listed online, and they are in the official Nirvana biographies, so it is public domain information, but out of respect for the fact that there is a tenant currently living there, and I think maybe in the front too, and I didn't get to talk to them, I won't be listing it in this video. In May of 1968, during the period when the Cobains were living in the larger house at the front of the property, Kurt's Aunt Mary wrote the following about Kurt. Quote, "His mother, Wendy, takes care of him most of the time. She shows her affection by holding him, giving him praise when he deserves it, and by taking part in many of his activities. He responds to his father in that when he sees his father, he smiles and he likes his dad to hold him. He makes his wants known by yelling loudly at first, then crying if the first technique doesn't work. Kurt's first dozen words were Coco, Mama, Dada, Ball, Toast, Bye Bye, Hi, Baby, Me, Love, Hot Dog, and Kitty. His reaction to sleep is that he cries when he is laid down to do so. He is so interested in the family that he doesn't want to leave them. He is a happy, smiling baby, and his personality is developing as it is because of the attention and love he is receiving." End quote. Both of Kurt Cobain's parents were young at the time of his birth. His father Don was 21 and his mother Wendy was 19. One of the challenges facing the young couple was financing. Money was a bit tight for them, but regardless, a few weeks after Kurt Cobain's birth, they were able to scrap together enough money to move out of the tiny house in the back to the larger house at the front of the property in Hoquiam. According to Don, Kurt Cobain's father, quote, "The rent was only an extra $5 a month, but in those times, $5 was a lot of money." As mentioned, approximately 2.5 years later, in September of 1969, the young family was able to afford a larger house in Aberdeen, the famous house on East 1st Street. The Cobains purchased the East 1st Street house for $7,950. But it was during the previous period of time, when Kurt's family was still living in Hoquiam, that Kurt first showed his initial inclination towards music. Kurt's mother's side of the family, the Freitenbergs, were musical. Wendy's older brother, Chuck, was in a band called the Beachcombers, his Aunt Mary played guitar, and his great-uncle Delbert had a career as an Irish tenor. During Christmas of 1968, when the Cobains visited Cosmopolis, another town near Aberdeen, Kurt was fascinated by the family jam sessions. Even as a kid, even as a little boy, Kurt Cobain enjoyed making up his own lyrics and singing. His family recording him singing along to the Beatles' Hey Jude, Arlo Guthrie's Motorcycle Song, and the theme to the Monkees. In Aunt Mary's words, quote, "I can't even put into words the joy and the life that Kurt brought into our family. He was this little human being who was so bubbly. He had charisma even as a baby. He was funny and he was bright." As a matter of fact, as a testament to how entertaining, bubbly, and funny little Kurt Cobain could be, his mother Wendy would often record him playing and goofing around with her Super 8mm camera. As mentioned a little earlier, the Cobains moved to Aberdeen when Kurt was approximately 2.5 years old. That is when they left the Hoquiam residence and moved to the East 1st Street house in Aberdeen. Kurt Cobain's younger sister Kimberly was born in April of 1970, so she was born and raised entirely in Aberdeen. She was not part of the Hoquiam household. All in all, I do believe that the East 1st Street house in Aberdeen is the most iconic and important of all the Cobain residences, because that is where Kurt spent the majority of his childhood and his adolescence. That is where he really developed artistically and where he developed as a person. So I do think that that house, rightfully so, is the most iconic one. But the one in Hoquiam, to me, is still an important house. It is the first house, the one at the back, and then the one at the front is really where Kurt spent the early part of his childhood. So although the other house is more iconic, the one on East 1st Street, I do think that the Hoquiam house does often get completely overlooked, even though it does deserve some recognition. So that is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video, to kind of talk a little bit about this piece of Nirvana history that often does get looked over. Now, for those of you who are curious, let's take a look at exactly where Hoquiam is. This is Washington State. If you take a look at the US map, you'll see that Washington State is right at the northwest corner of the US bordering Canada. As some of you know, I'm Canadian, so therefore the fact that Washington borders Canada makes Washington that much cooler. In the western part of the state, you have Seattle, the largest city in Washington. About an hour southwest of Seattle, you have the state capital, Olympia, and about 2 hours southwest of Seattle is Aberdeen, home of Nirvana and a really cool Star Wars store. Yes, you heard that correctly. There is literally a store in Aberdeen dedicated to everything Star Wars. I'm going to be doing a separate video about that. Now, directly to the west of Aberdeen, you have Hoquiam. And I really want to emphasize when I say that it is literally directly to the west. Driving from Aberdeen to Hoquiam, if you don't notice the sign that says you're entering Hoquiam, you wouldn't know you're entering a different town, because Aberdeen and Hoquiam look almost identical. Now, of course, if you're consciously aware where one city ends and the other begins, that's a different story. But if you're just driving through for the first time and you miss the sign that indicates you're entering a different town, you probably wouldn't notice the difference. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, by the way. I'm just saying that's what my experience was like driving through. The same is true driving from Hoquiam to Aberdeen. Unless you see the sign that says "Welcome to Aberdeen," you really can't tell the difference unless you already know where you're going. Hoquiam was incorporated as a city in 1890 and has a population of approximately 9,000 people. Aberdeen was incorporated 2 years earlier in 1888 and has a population of approximately 17,000 people, nearly double that of Hoquiam. The name Hoquiam comes from a Native American word which means hungry for wood, a reference to the large amount of driftwood at the mouth of the Hoquiam River. With regards to wood, with regards to lumber, like Aberdeen, Hoquiam is a town that has a long history of logging.
So you're saying that path was never there?
This path, this was all overgrown and it stopped about right here.
Hey guys, in order to get underneath Cobain Bridge in Aberdeen, most people, myself included, use this pathway. While I was here in Aberdeen, however, a local woman named Janine told me that this pathway wasn't actually there during Kurt's time. She showed me what the original way was to get underneath the bridge. A big thank you to her.
We had to come this way to get down under here.
You have to go through this way?
Yeah, this is the only way to get under here. And we used to have to wait and take turns. We'd go one at a time. And we'd wait and make sure that there was no cars coming. Stand over here on the other side of the guardrail so it didn't look like we were going under the bridge. We'd act like we were walking. And then when there's no cars like this, one of us would run down there. Two if we were lucky, but there's so many cars coming over this bridge. It was usually just one of us.
So you guys had those big parties of like 30 people. How'd you get down there?
That same way. Same exact way.
So this was the original way to get down there.
Yeah. It was the only way. There was six of us built up so big.
So you're saying that when Kurt was around, this is how he went down?
And I know that this here was not always here too. It was dug out before me coming down here, but I know that you had to go right here. This was the only way in here.
This pink building is the old location of Maria's hair design in Aberdeen, which was run by Chris Novoselic's mother, Maria. Chris Novoselic and Kurt Cobain both went to Aberdeen High School and became friends while attending Melvin's practices. Kurt wanted to start a band with Chris, but Chris wasn't initially on board. It wasn't until a few months after Kurt Cobain and Dale Crover's 1986 Fecal Demo Matter was recorded that Chris Novoselic reciprocated and told Kurt he wanted to start a band. An empty apartment above Maria's hair design was used as their rehearsal space. Now, before I go further, I want to mention that I did speak with two of the tenants living here, and they both said they were cool with me taking a few shots of the building, so thank you to them. As mentioned in my other videos, these Nirvana locations are all public domain info, but whenever possible, I think it's still good practice to ask before filming. The location of this building is on 107 South Main Street in Aberdeen, and if you look at Google Maps, you'll see that it actually used to be green, so who knows what color it may have been when Nirvana was here. But more importantly, there is a little confusion at times about exactly which part of the building the rehearsals took place in. As mentioned, the rehearsals took place in an apartment above Maria's hair design, but which apartment? Although this is a relatively small building, there are actually two separate apartments on the first floor, 107A and 107B. The same may be true for the top floor. I asked the two tenants if they knew where in the building Nirvana rehearsed, and they both said at the back, which would suggest that they practiced in the apartment above 107B. From the looks of it, however, it appears like it's just one apartment on the entire top floor, not two, but that's not entirely clear. It could be that the entire back half of the building is 107B and the entire front half is 107A, so this particular point does require further clarification, but regardless of exactly where on the top floor of this building the rehearsals took place, what we do know definitively is that they did take place somewhere on the top floor. Now, the location for the old Maria's hair design building is just off of the main street, which runs through downtown Aberdeen. The main street in Aberdeen is Wishka Street. The old Maria's hair design building is located on South M Street, just to the right of Wishka. I should mention, by the way, that if you are planning on visiting Aberdeen, make sure to note that Wishka is a one-way street. Leaving my hotel, I almost turned the wrong way onto Wishka, straight into traffic, before thankfully remembering it's a one-way, so just keep that in mind if you are planning on visiting. As mentioned a little earlier, Chris and Kurt became friends while attending Melvin's practices. Those practices predominantly took place at this house. This is Dale Crover's old house in Aberdeen. I won't be listing the address for this house in this video, but again, it's all public domain info listed in the Nirvana biographies. And speaking of biographies, it does say in some of the Nirvana biographies, as well as in the Aberdeen Museum of History website, that during one of Kurt's periods of homelessness, he slept in a cardboard box on Dale Crover's porch. Now, as you can see, there isn't really a porch here, it's just steps, so this may have been renovated since then, or it could have actually been these steps that they are referring to as a porch, or there might be a porch in the back that's not clear, but Regardless, according to these bios and according to the actual Museum of History website for Aberdeen, it does say that he did sleep here, so that is definitely noteworthy. Interestingly, Dale Crover's old house is just a few minutes walking distance from the old Maria's Hair Design building. So, in other words, Nirvana's main practice space and the Melvins' main practice space were only a few minutes walking distance from each other. Another cool thing is that there actually is some video footage of Nirvana practicing at the Maria's Hair Design building back in 1988. Nirvana's lineup at the time of the recording consisting of Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, and Chad Channing. Chris Novoselic's brother, Robert Novoselic, is actually the one who recorded the video, and it was released as part of the With the Lights Out box set. 4 of Nirvana's other friends were also present at the practice session: Ben Latin, Steve Newman, Senad Begovic, and Ryan Egner. Ryan having been an early manager for Nirvana, who was also responsible for arranging Nirvana's debut concert in Raymond, Washington. If you'd like to see the video I made about the history of that first ever Nirvana performance, the link is available in the description box below. The songs Nirvana performed at this practice session were Love Buzz, Scoff, About a Girl, Big Long Now, Immigrant Song, which is a Zeppelin cover of course, Spank Through, Hairspray Queen, School, and Mr. Moustache. Now, as discussed earlier, one of Kurt Cobain's former houses was completely torn down. The house address was 1000.5 East 2nd Street, just a few minutes walking distance from the famous Cobain house on East 1st Street. The East 2nd Street house, which again no longer exists, was the first house that Kurt Cobain rented on his own. It was a very small house, often compared to a shack, but nevertheless still a house. Kurt lived there in parts of 1986 and 1987, and it was a place where Nirvana used to jam. As a matter of fact, the recording of Miss Butterworth, which appears on the With the Lights Out box set, was recorded at this location. Furthermore, it was also a location where the Melvins practiced, so if you guys want to be able to stand on the spot where Kurt, Chris, and Aaron Burkhardt recorded Miss Butterworth, and one of the places where the Melvins used to practice, now's your chance because as of the time of this recording, in September of 2020, there's nothing there but grass. Perhaps the city or someone else may intend on putting something there at some point, but for now, it's just grass. A quick note on Miss Butterworth, by the way. The song was actually an untitled track. Kurt Cobain did not name the song Miss Butterworth. It's believed that Nirvana's management company came up with the title Miss Butterworth before including the song on the 2004 With the Lights Out box set. One other thing I want to show you guys is that 1 minute walking distance up the street from where this house used to be is a thrift shop. If that thrift shop was around at the time Kurt was living here, I can imagine it being a place Kurt would have enjoyed visiting. Hey guys, so I'm going to show you exactly where Nirvana's only ever official concert took place in Aberdeen. Nirvana, of course, is from Aberdeen, and so the fact that they only had one official concert here is interesting to note. And I'm going to show you exactly where it took place. This right here is the location of the only Nirvana concert that happened in Aberdeen. And so you may be wondering, does that mean it was an outdoor concert? Well, actually, there used to be a restaurant right here. It was called the Poorhouse, and it was just demolished only a couple of years back, so it was recently still here. As a matter of fact, if you go to Google Maps, if you look at it on a certain angle, you can see the restaurant is still there. If you go on the other side of the map, it'll show you that it's gone, but it is kind of an interesting little hack. There's not much information about the show available, other than that it took place at some point in 1988, and that Kurt and Chris reportedly performed Beatles covers as part of the show. Interestingly, in an interview from 2018, Chris Novoselic said he doesn't even remember playing the Poorhouse. That's how obscure of a show this was. Now, the main street which runs past where the old Poorhouse used to be is Wishka Street. This is the main street in Aberdeen which goes right through downtown. And on the other side of the Wishka, across from where the old Poorhouse used to be, there is a small building complex. And one of the units in this building complex is actually a Star Wars store. Believe it or not, Aberdeen has a store dedicated to everything Star Wars, which is pretty cool. Kurt Cobain was arrested twice as a teenager. The first time he was arrested was for spray painting Ain't Got No Whatchamacallit on the side of this building in 1985. this being the former Seafirst Bank building in Aberdeen. Today there is a social service organization operating from the building. The second time he was arrested was for going up onto the roof of this building in 1986. This building was just an abandoned building at the time. As of the time of this recording, the building is currently vacant. When it comes to Aberdeen, there are a few well-known Nirvana locations. The Yonge Street Bridge, Kurt Cobain's old houses, the Welcome to Aberdeen sign, and others, but these two places where Kurt Cobain was arrested are two of the lesser-known spots. Understandably, there aren't any signs or indicators anywhere that state that Kurt was arrested at either of these two locations. The mid-80s was an important time in Kurt Cobain's life for a variety of reasons, one of them being this was the point where Kurt really started to find himself as a musician. As such, I want to read to you a passage from Gillian Gigar's Nirvana biography Entertain Us, where one of the early stages of Nirvana's formation is discussed. Quote, in September 1986, Kurt moved into a small house at 1000 East 2nd Street in Aberdeen, universally referred to as The Shack, due to its dilapidated condition. It quickly became as much of a hangout for their friends as Dale Crover's home had been, with the added benefit of having no parental figures around. Chris was already Kurt's most frequent jamming partner, but it took them a while to find another member for their nascent group. They rehearsed with one friend, Bob McFadden, upstairs at Maria's Hair Design, the beauty parlor owned by Chris' mother. Other musicians came and went, as the two constantly rejigged the lineup, including who played with which instrument. Sometimes Kurt and Chris switched from their usual guitar and bass roles to drums and guitar, respectively. Kurt was really good on drums, Chris recalls. They also toyed with the idea of putting together a Creedence Clearwater Revival covers band, but like many of their ideas, it came to nothing. That was a ploy to make money, Chris explains. Play in a tavern like a bar band, but we thought we'd play cool songs. It was just something to do to screw around on the side. We played once or twice and got bored with it. They finally approached Aaron Burkhardt, a drummer they'd met at Melvin's practices. According to Matt Lukin, he and Buzz had briefly considered Aaron as Mike Dillard's replacement in the Melvins, but decided against it in part because of Aaron's mustache, the bane of punk rockers. Aaron, older than both Kurt and Chris, had grown up in West Seattle and moved to Aberdeen in his mid-teens, where he played in a local band called Soon. Aaron lived behind Dale Crover's house across an alley dubbed Swagger Alley. I used to go over and watch the Melvins practice a lot, he says. Every time they practiced, I was over there. It was just something to do. I was amazed at how loud they were. Aaron was also hanging out at Kurt's shack. Despite being a staunch metalhead, I was into Motley Crue and AC/DC, and Kurt was more into the punk scene, he says. Aaron agreed to join the fledgling band. I'd heard that Kurt was a guitar player and that Chris was a bass player, he says. I never heard him play before. The day I joined the band, I didn't have no drums, so we went out to a friend's house and he set me up with some drums. And we went over to Kurt's house and practiced the same night. It was an early indication of Kurt's single-minded focus on rehearsal. Kurt was just a stickler for practicing, Aaron says. We practiced a lot, every day for hours. Once Kurt got off work, it was practice non-stop. It was pretty crazy. Sometimes we played the same song over and over until Kurt got it right, Aaron recalls. In Kurt Cobain's words, we would play the set and then I would just start playing the songs again right away without ever looking up to see if those guys wanted to play them again. Kurt later told Michael Azarad, I'd just whip them into shape. This is the Come As You Are sign in Aberdeen, Washington that greets people as they drive into town. It's up on a small hill on the right side of the road leading into Aberdeen, the road being part of Washington State's Olympic Highway. It's well known that there's a ton of fan graffiti underneath the Yonge Street Bridge in Aberdeen, the bridge where, according to Nirvana folklore, Kurt Cobain slept when he was homeless at certain points in time. Now, most Nirvana biographers have said that he hasn't actually slept there, but regardless, that is often what is cited about this bridge. But what's not well known is that there's also a lot of fan messages left on the back of this Come As You Are sign that you pass by when you're going into Aberdeen. Now, granted, there aren't as many messages here as there are underneath the bridge, but it's still cool to see that some fans have left messages here from different parts of the world. Now, I do want to advise that if you are planning on checking out the sign, approach with caution because, again, this sign is located at the side of a highway. Considering this is a spot that some fans do walk up to visit, if it's feasible, I think it'd be a good idea for the city to possibly create some kind of a parking space for fans to safely park their cars and check out the sign. I met a couple up here at the sign who had driven to Aberdeen from New Jersey, specifically because they wanted to see Kurt Cobain's hometown. This sign is part of the Nirvana folklore of the town, and I do think that if the city, again, if they can afford to, it'd be a good idea to have some kind of a parking space nearby the sign. The Come As You Are message at the bottom of the sign was added in 2005. The rest of the sign was already pre-existing. The non-profit Kurt Cobain Memorial Committee was the organization behind getting Come As You Are added to the Welcome to Aberdeen sign. This wasn't without some controversy, however, as there were some Aberdeen residents opposed to adding the Come As You Are message. In 2013, the Welcome to Aberdeen sign was scheduled to be replaced, and the city did consider potentially removing the Come As You Are message from it. In light of this, the mayor of Aberdeen at the time received over 300 emails from different Nirvana fans asking the city not to remove the Come As You Are message from the sign. These emails contributed to the city's decision to keep the Come As You Are message on the sign. I personally think the Come As You Are message is a nice touch. The first time I saw the sign driving into Aberdeen, I thought it was really cool. As the years go by, more and more people from around the world learn that Aberdeen is Kurt Cobain's hometown, many people making the trip to Aberdeen specifically for that reason. As such, I do think it's a nice touch to have the Nirvana reference added to the Welcome to Aberdeen sign, which you see again as you drive into town. In 2005, Jeff Burlingame, one of the co-chairs of the Kurt Cobain Memorial Committee, said that, quote, "After getting feedback from Kurt's fans around the world, we settled on Come As You Are because it had dual meaning," end quote. Burlingame explained that the band's fans would understand the significance of the message, but that the message was still vague enough to appeal to just about anybody coming to Aberdeen. In 2005, Paul Fritz, another co-chair of the committee, said, quote, "I think this sign goes a long way towards showing people that Aberdeen finally recognizes the contributions of Kurt Cobain and Nirvana." So when it comes to the famous bridge in Aberdeen, there are lots of videos of people underneath the bridge, but I haven't seen anyone go on top of the bridge and get that perspective. So with this video, I want to actually walk on the bridge to the other side and back. Interestingly, in order to get from Kurt Cobain's famous childhood home in Aberdeen over to Chris Novoselvich's old house in Aberdeen, the quickest way would be to go over this bridge. Alright guys, so I am here with Aaron Burkhardt. We just happened to bump into each other on the road. Aaron, thank you so much for your time.
No
really
problem.
Appreciate it. So, when did you first meet Kurt?
I met Kurt in '86. I lived across the alley from Dale Covert, drummer for the Melvins. And I used to go to practice all the time. I was with Dale right across the alley. And that's where Kurt and Chris... Kurt used to hang out there a lot. And Kurt and Chris showed up one day and asked me to play drums. I didn't have no drums, so we went out to my buddy Sam Layton and got enough drums. And we were set up in Kurt's living room that night.
That's so cool. You remember what the first songs were that you played with
Yeah, it was one of the first songs we wrote were, I believe it would be Floyd the Barber, Mexican Seafood, Hairspray Queen, Stank True. There was, we did a couple covers. We did Thieves, Tramps, and Thieves by Sonny and Cher, right?
Sonny and Cher?
Yeah, and Chris sang that song.
So do you have a favorite song that you were involved with Nirvana?
Probably Pen Cap Chew.
Pen Cap Chew was your
Yeah,
favorite
that was
one?
our second name also. Second name is the band. We already had the song called Pen Cap Chew. But then we played a midnight show. In Olympia. And the next day, I told Kurt I'd come unload the gear in the morning. It was so late. And when I got to his house, he had painted the big... Is that Jillian? That's Jillian Garr. She's more famous than me.
Yeah.
Hi, Jillian.
The last two times I'm in Aberdeen, I was thinking about you. We were down
How's it
at the
going?
landing, and I thought, gee, I should have told Aaron we were coming.
I met Lee who bought the house, and he let me in first.
Entertain Us is one of the best books.
But,
Why, thank you.
There's a few songs that you played on, like demos that are on some of the box sets, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Which songs are those?
Heartbreaker, Mrs. Butterworth, Hairspray Queen. Well, Incesticide, there's 5 songs on Incesticide that my lawyer is checking right now. That was drummer when they were created. A couple songs on Bleach.
When you're in front of this house, do you ever think about Kurt?
No, I didn't know Kurt when he lived here. I used to hear the guitar sometimes when I walked through the alley, but that was about it. But I knew Kurt when he lived over here. This house not there anymore.
Yeah, it's not. I checked it out this morning. Yeah, it's been demolished completely.
Yeah, it's been gone like 15 years.
Yeah, it's too bad.
But that's where Kurt lived the whole time I was jamming with him.
So how did you join Nirvana? Like, how did that begin?
It was at a Melvin's practice. Kurt and Chris asked me to be the drummer. We were pretty tight, and we caught on fast.
If you'd be comfortable talking about it, what happened exactly? Like, how come you left the band?
They had gotten Dave Foster to play drums, and one day Chris called me up, and Dave was arrested or something, so they wanted me to join back in the band. So they came pick me up, and I hate telling the story because it's really
no, whatever you're comfortable with.
No, it's fine. And my dad's a merchant marine, so I left. Kurt wanted to listen to our practice that night, so we went to my dad's, and my dad was on shift, so I left Kurt there, and I was just going to run up to the store and grab a 6-pack and come back. Well, I had been drinking all practice. It's not like I took the car and went up and got drunk. I just stopped and had a drink, barely half a drink. Right, and boom! I was back in the car, but I was already drunk from practice, from drinking practice.
Yeah.
And I got pulled over. Yeah, and I left Kurt sitting in my dad's place for like 4 or 5 hours. He didn't know what was going on. There's no phone, so I called Chris, and Chris came and got me because they booked and released me. 5 hours later, the car got impounded.
Jeez.
And hindsight is 2020, I tell you. And if I would have known what was going to happen a year and a half later, I would have groveled. I would have groveled at his feet.
Yeah.
But as it was, he fired me then. That was the last straw.
So, if you don't mind me asking, when Nirvana really took off, how did you react to that? Like, were you like?
Everybody just wants to think I was all upset and jealous. I wasn't. I was happy. I was thrilled to death, you know. Because I was already, I was part of it, you know. And I was happy for him because I know exactly what he wanted to do, and he did exactly what he wanted to do. He hated all the metal bands. He hated that cock rock, I call it. He hated them guys. He hated the mainstream. And like Tom Petty said, one swoop with the sickle, farmer just cut them all down. And I know he loved that to death, you know.
Do you have a favorite Nirvana song?
Yeah, probably would be Drain You.
Drain You is your favorite one? So what was it like a Nirvana practice like in the early days? Like what was the vibe? Was it really serious? Were you guys goofing around?
It's serious. Bye guys.
Really nice to meet you.
Take care. It was serious. Kurt, we play when we learned the song, we played the same song over and over all day.
Did you ever like break anything when you were playing with them?
Yeah, I break sticks all the time. I'm a rock drummer. I hit them like they owe me money. I hit the drums hard, and they break sticks. But, you know, I could play with a broken stick until the next song.
So you mentioned you were friends with the Melvins too, right?
Yeah.
When Dale Grover was playing in Nirvana, did you have any contact with him? Like, did you know that he was in the band?
Yeah.
That's cool.
It was just we weren't anybody, you know, back in then. We'd play shows up at Cone Olympia, you know. But there was nothing special about it. We were just rock band. We were a rock band, you know. That's it. And now you think of Nirvana now with the fame and everything, but back then it was, you know, we were just regular guys, regular band, you know. There was hindsight is 2020, like I said.
Yeah. Did you ever meet Chad Channing at all?
Yeah, I'm friends with Chad. Yeah, I've met him a few times.
That's cool. Well, do you remember the first time you met Chad?
Yeah, it was at we were opening for them at the Hope Needles.
With Attica was opening for Nirvana?
Yeah, that's when I first met Chad. And they came by my house and hung out for a while. Yeah, that's when I met Chad.
So for you, what is your personal goal with music right now?
It's just keep playing. I'm pretty. I still have my chops. I still play every day. You know, I play every day. I play my drums every day, and it's not so much. Maybe make a few bucks. But I can live without a few bucks. It don't matter, you know. I just did an interview with this film company from Berlin, and they're coming out with it's called Rock Bottom, Songs with No Money. It's about musicians, 5 musicians. I'm one of them, and they, you know, still chasing the dream, basically.
So if I may ask, do you have any regrets from your time with Nirvana at all? What is your regret?
I regret stopping at that. Stopping at that bar and getting a drink. And getting pulled over, of course I regret that. I learned I was an alcoholic. I don't drink now, but back then, alcohol destroyed. It sucked up my. You know, I would probably have been with them when they made it big. If I wouldn't have got that DWI and switched car right off the street. But I can't change that, and I just got to live with it, and I'm good with that. You know, I regret it. That's a very big regret, and I regret stopping at that bar. You know, on the way home, I shouldn't have. But what you can do, I can't change it. I just got to live with the present now. And I'm comfortable with being a member of Nirvana. There's 5 other drummers, you know. It's like, but I'm the original. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time, man. I really, really appreciate it. So we bumped into each other. I was at Kurt Cobain Landing at the bridge over there. You happened to be walking towards it. Do you spend a lot of time at the bridge?
Yeah, well, my band practice is right across from the park.
Oh,
that's
cool.
where my drums are.
Oh, cool. What's your new band?
It's not new. It's an old band, but it's new. It's Attica, called Attica.
Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm back here in Montesano at the trailer where Gary Cobain lives. Gary, thank you so much for having me in, man.
Okay.
So you had a very different life. You were in the Army, is that correct?
Yeah.
What inspired you to get into the Army?
I don't know. One day, me and my buddy got drunk. And he said, let's go sign up.
That's funny. Were you ever deployed anywhere overseas?
Yeah, I was in Hawaii, Germany.
Wow. How was that general experience for you?
It was different, let me tell you. It's a whole different world.
Is there any one memory you have of your military service that you're fond of?
Yeah, well, Germany, when I was on Journey, you don't find no paper or nothing out on the roads. None. Nowhere.
Super clean over there.
Yeah, really clean. I didn't believe it. Autobahn was fun.
You went on the Autobahn?
Yeah, I drove on the Autobahn.
Wow, how fast did you go on that thing?
As fast as that car could go.
I've always wanted to check that out, actually, the Autobahn.
Oh, man, the roads are just smooth, man. The corners are banked and everything.
Really, eh?
Yeah. There's some here pictures of Kurt there, and there's Courtney and Kurt and Francis. That's my kid in the corner with one of the hip.
Let me see.
Over there.
That's your kid?
No, that's his kid. And my kid's right there. Boy.
That's so cool. What's his name?
Christopher.
Christopher. And how old is Christopher now?
42.
42, wow. So do you have grandkids?
Yeah, that's one, and that's one. And, one with him, and that's her. One of them.
So cool.
She's just about 21 now.
That's awesome. So you're a Seahawks fan?
Yeah. This is all my dad's dad and mom, and these are their anniversaries.
Wow.
And that's my mom there, too. Get it?
That's your mother?
Yeah. She used to do ballet, man.
That's cool. I'm Canadian, right? So both my parents immigrated to Canada, so I'm like a first generation Canadian.
Oh, yeah?
So I'm just curious, like, how many generations in the States you guys have been?
Oh, shit, who knows? My dad had, what? Ernie, Burl, Kenny. God, I can't remember his sister's name now. I had a sister, too.
No worries. But you guys are part Irish from what I understand, right?
Yeah, mostly Irish, yeah.
That's
and
cool.
I was French.
Oh, that's cool. I'm actually a French citizen. So my dad used to live in France, and I've never lived there, but their government, if you have a parent that's a French citizen, then you can get one yourself, like citizenship yourself. So when Nirvana got really big, like when did you first learn that he was in a band? First of all,
It was when I got out of the service. When I first got out, I was driving down the road and I seen this thing that said Nirvana on a car, and I didn't know what it was Kurt or anything until later on, until they started getting popular.
and how did that feel like seeing your nephew becoming, as famous as he did?
Fuck, I know, just like that. That was pretty cool.
Do you have a favorite Nirvana song?
No, I don't, but I like them. I like them all, really.
So the people in this park, do they know that you're Kurt's uncle?
Yeah.
And do they ever ask you questions about him or anything?
A couple of them might. 4 lanes on one side, 4 lanes on the other. Left lane's the fastest lane.
In the Autobahn?
Yeah, if you're in the left lane and you're going and somebody gets behind you, he'll flash your lights. You're not fast enough, get out of the way.
Yeah. So what's your dog's name, by the way?
Well, that's my dad's old dog.
It's your dad's old dog. What kind of breed is she?
He's a Chihuahua.
Chihuahua.
Aren't you a long-haired Chihuahua? Well, somebody sent that to us.
That's cool.
I forget who.
Do you like it when people come visit you?
I don't mind. But my dad didn't mind at all. He let this lady in Canada. She stayed here 6 months.
Really? You had a guest stay here 6 months?
And then my dad went over to England with her.
Wow.
For a couple months. He went to Ireland and all that, checked out. We had a few cousins over there, I guess. My dad was a good dart player.
Really?
Yeah. He went to state in it.
So what is the PDA?
What?
PDA. What? Like it says PDA Summer Darts League. What is that exactly?
It's a dart league, PDA. It's some association of it.
I guess it could be Professional Dart Association, if I had to guess.
Could be.
Or Pacific Dart Association. Probably one of those guys.
I was on the team.
You were on the team. You were on the team with your dad?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, 69ers I think we were on.
Oh wow. Is that your mom with your dad there?
Yeah. It's a cuckoo clock I brought from Germany.
Did you get this when you were deployed?
Yeah, over there. Yeah, got that over there.
So which branch of the service were you in?
Army.
Did you ever go to the Middle East?
Nope. It was around Vietnam. Vietnam was still going when I went in. I didn't get pulled over there though.
Sorry, say it again?
Huh?
Were you talking to me?
No, I was talking to myself, I guess.
So most of this art you said comes from just random fans who send you stuff?
Yeah. All these bike ones are my brother Jimmy. He's the drawer of the family. He did that cat in high school. Really? Yeah. 63.
That's cool. That's well done. And you said that your mother made this one here?
Yeah, she could draw too.
So your family's artistic?
Yeah. That's where Kurt got that, I think. And the other family,
Wendy's family?
Part of the family is all music. That's how he really started.
Yeah.
Mary gave him a guitar. He wanted to play the drums, but he couldn't keep beat.
What was the first sign that you got that, okay, Kurt's pretty talented? Like, when do you remember anything?
We were at one of his uncle's places. We're all over there, I think, on New Year's Eve or something. His uncle had a band, and down below there was a drum set, and he snuck down there, and you could tell he wanted that. He was good at making clay models and movies and stuff like that.
Kurt was?
Yeah, he did a whole movie, I don't know where it went, of dinosaurs and stuff. You have to move them every little bit to make the movie.
So Gary, what exactly is that you're holding right now?
It's just a cane I made.
You made this, yeah?
Yeah. It's got a couple other things in it.
Woo! Damn, what is the reason for that?
A shish kebab.
So you're into craftsmanship, you're into building things?
Yeah, that's a bicycle shit there. That's a gooseneck. That's a pair of handlebars. And I just put a piece of wood in there, too.
And you made this?
Yeah.
I don't know, this guy, is this like a makeshift spear?
No, it's just a walking stick. I took the light and shit off of it.
That's cool. So is that something you do to pass the time? You like to build things?
Yeah, if I get bored.
So what inspired you to make this weapon of a staff?
I've seen one before like it. Something with a weapon in it.
All right, Gary, well, I guess I will never bother you when you're holding that. So what's the farthest the fan has gone to come see you?
Italy, Japan.
Really? You've had people from Japan here?
Yeah.
Wow. And are they usually on their way down to Aberdeen when they come by?
Checking out Kurt's stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Go Seattle first. Yeah, Australia. We come from France or Paris. And they brought us, look how dirty that fucker is.
So you had a fan come from France and he gave you a bottle of wine?
Yeah. These are old too. They've been here, fuck, ever since he passed away, I think. So
you've had these bottles of wine here for like decades? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Wow. I want to open them. They might taste really good by now.
Or rotten, one of the two.
Yeah.